Okay, I think we're good to start. Go ahead and get started. I say that and then immediately cough on camera. All right, there we go. The mic's live and then immediately cough into it. Right. Great start. Things are looking up for us. Hey, how's it going? Welcome to the stream. If this is your first time here, hey, thanks for being here. This is a returning time for you. Thanks for coming back. Good to see you. So today we're going to talk about a few different things. We're going to talk about some homebrew ancestry stuff. We're going to talk about some Appendix N stuff. Very, very nerdy D&D stuff, as usual, for these streams that we do here at this day and time. If you are watching us live and not watching the VOD later, you will probably be aware that yesterday was Halloween. Okay. I was actually going to stream yesterday. I was actually going to stream during Halloween. I had plans kind of fall through, and then kind of was left with my evening kind of being like, well, here I am. So I thought about streaming, and then, of course, seriously, got everything set up, got everything sat down, got everything booted up. Was going to play a game, actually, over on Twitch, and then pulled it up, and immediately... As soon as I did that and started working on stuff, I realized that my internet had just gone down. So, kind of screwed those plans over. So it's kind of a double duper. Lost plan A, and then I lost plan B. And then kind of plan C, because I was just going to watch like a movie instead, and then couldn't do that either. So, it was a very quiet evening. Let's put it, a very quiet Halloween evening, surprisingly. Much quieter than usual. So that's how it goes. Other things that happened this week that are of note. I'm sure something happened, right? We did not play... Well, I mean, we did play D&D last week on Friday. But we had no D&D yesterday. Had no D&D, obviously. And I'm not going to be running for the next 2 weeks because we have one of our players out. But I think one of my current players in the campaign that I'm running is going to be jumping in and running a 1/2 shot. So we're waiting to hear more words about that. So that may or may not be coming. Let's see. And I think we're going to play this coming week. Yeah, in the campaign that I play in. Didn't play last week, or won't play tomorrow, technically. So we're going to play Wednesday instead. And yeah, well, that's about it. And then I think we're off for another week or two. So it's a bit of a dry spell with the old D&D. I do a little shaky hand thing, but this is very full. I don't want to spill hot coffee all over myself. Unless that's entertaining for you. Is that what you want? Is that what you want? I'll do it. I won't do that. I don't care that much. I gotta burn myself. Let's see. Anything else that happened of note? I really need to start writing this stuff down during the week as it happens. And relating to the stream, I don't think so. Oh, I started playing a new game. That was the thing that I was going to stream yesterday. It's called An Ice for Fishing. It's I didn't know this, but it's the Viva La Dirt League people. If you don't know them, they make skits on YouTube primarily about D&D and like World of Warcraft kind of online RPG kind of stuff. And they make skits about being in those sorts of worlds. So, you know, a lot of costumes and get-ups and all that silly fantasy nonsense, along with some other stuff. But apparently they put out a video game. I had no idea. I stumbled across it randomly. I was like, oh, well, I'm looking for something that's, you know, bite-sized, super easy to pull in, and it's literally a fishing game, like a 2D pixel art fishing game, and I was like, all right, I can play that. So I've been playing that, and I was going to stream that yesterday, but that's what happens. Wasn't able to get around to it because of the old lovely ISPs that we have here in the U.S. They're real great, and there's no problems with them whatsoever. But let's go ahead and jump in and get... I'll stop complaining so we can move on with the stream. That seems like probably what most people want. Let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to start pulling some stuff up. Give me just a moment. Yeah, and we're going to do that. And we're gonna do that. Doing good. Alright, we got that done. And that done. Alright, let's pull it up. You don't need to see that. That's for me, that's not for you. Okay, so let's take a look. And I forget, I have not set this up. Need. Ha! There we go. Make this a little bit bigger. And we'll do 125. Yeah, we usually do. I guess we. There we go. Make it easier. Alright, this music is a little not quite what I'm looking for. I'm gonna go ahead and get a little not quite the action music that we need here. Alright. So we're going to talk a little bit about the homebrew world, ancestries, and races. So this is something that I'm doing for the current campaign that I'm running, the ongoing world that I am building, that I have been building for a very long time. It's a slow process. If you are interested in being a dungeon master and or other type of game master and creating your own world, whether that be fantasy or sci-fi or whatever it is, and to set adventures in and do all that sort of stuff, don't do this. This is not the easy way to do this. This is the hard, laborious, takes a long time, effort, more really effort of a lifetime. Get something on the shorts. I'm sure it's fine. Yeah, so don't follow this as an example, like this is something you should be doing. I just want to share bits and pieces of it. That way you can pull bits and pieces of it to do it. But like, if you're the sort of person who's like, I'm thinking about running a campaign, or I'm thinking about running a game, especially if you're a newer DM, dungeon master, or game master of any sort of ilk, and you're like, well, you know, I want to set it in my own custom world, and do that sort of stuff. Don't do this. You need to build like outward, bottom up, as we call it in world building. You need to build. It will behoove you to build the world bottom up rather than top down, which is what we're doing. What I'm doing with this project, because I know that this is something that I want to continue to set games in, probably for the rest of my life, you know, fingers crossed, long, right? So I don't mind putting into it, and also this is stuff that I find interesting. There are a lot of people who find the world building stuff kind of tedious, so you don't need to do all this stuff, like we got pages of stuff here. You don't need to be doing this stuff, and this is relatively short. I have not worked on this document a ton. There are ancestries here that I really have not touched. But I did think of a couple things this week, and so I did wanted to add a few into it because I'm trying to build it up a little bit as I'm running stuff. So we've got humans here, so well, let me take a step back. So what's the point about making like customizing ancestries for your world? I think in most custom worlds that you're going to build for D&D or whatever system it is, you're probably not going to do well, I don't want to phrase this. This is really important. Essentially, the way that I run the world, let me just do it from my own perspective. The way that I run the world is that all the races / ancestries in D&D you can play in my world. That's fine. I don't care. There are a lot of people who are like, well, there are no elves in this world or whatever. This is a human-centric world. Or some people are like, I don't want gnomes because kinders are awful. Agree, but that's not what we're dealing with. But my idea is that yeah, you can play whatever you want. It's just there are certain races. If you play the specific races that are integral to the world and the history and the goings-on of the world, there's going to be some extra stuff that kind of goes with them. You get some little ribbon abilities, you get some extra stuff that's kind of going on. And these are, rather than trying to, I don't even know how many ancestries we're up to in D&D 5e/2024. Dozens, right? It's easily dozens. It's like, I'm not going to do the work to make dozens, trying to figure out where I'm going to put Thri-kreen in this world. And it's like the likelihood that somebody's going to play Thri-kreen on a regular basis is pretty low. Or shifters or anything like that. So I'm really like, I'm going to focus in on some when I was making this document originally and I was planning the world, I was like, all right, I want to pick some very specific ancestries that I want to focus on, that I want them to be sort of the key ancestries of the world. And some things that I'm going to change and tweak just to, keep it fun, keep it different. And so I'll go over those first, and then you'll see how we're going to focus in, how I focused in and kind of change some of the stuff to make them, kind of weave them specifically into the world in as organic fashion as I can. So there are perceptions that people have within the world about the different ancestries, which my players just come across some of these and are able to use some of these. So here are the ones that I have thus far. Thus far. These are the ones that I have. These are the ones that are important in my custom world setting. So humans, bog standard humans. I don't really have anything super special about them right now. We'll go through all the extra stuff first, but I do want to just kind of tell who's in there. Dwarves are in here, of course. I'm a big fan of dwarves, so of course I'm going to put the dwarves in there. Elves. It's a fantasy game. You going to have a fantasy game without elves? I mean, you could. That would be an interesting world, I guess. But I mean, somebody's going to want to play an elf. For sure. Now we're going to start to get into some things that are a little bit interesting. So I have swords in here. So swords are... You'll start to see that I start to combine ancestries together. So this combines Dragonborn, Lizardfolk, and Yuan-Ti, basically. Anybody who's basically kind of a cold-blooded race, but not amphibians. So not the Grung or Bullywugs or anything like that, but anything that falls under... Like if somebody wanted to really play... If I wanted to make a sidekick character that was like a troglodyte, they'd be a sword in the world. And we get down here to halfers, same thing. Halfers are a combination. I just combine gnomes and halflings together. They're so close already in my mind. Like they're not super dissimilar. They're short. That's kind of their thing, is being short. Half elves, got those in there. So if you have humans and you have elves, likely that you're gonna have half elves. That's pretty high. I mean, unless you want to make a world where that you're like, oh well, the species cannot interbreed, which you could, and I think that's perfectly rational. In the same way that you often don't come across settings that have dwarves and humans that can have hybrid offspring, unless you're in Dark Sun. Dark Sun does have that. They're called the Mole. They're weirdly like large, hairless. They're basically Goliaths, which is the weird thing. So they're basically Goliaths, kind of. But in the fact that they are large, muscular, and basically hairless. And speaking of Goliaths, we have Giantkin. This would where I would throw things like Furbolgs, Goliaths, half giants, things like that would all fall under Giantkin, kind of. That kind of umbrella term for an ancestry. And then for the specific world that I have, Genasi are a primary race in there because Genasi are a thing that I really like from. I guess they're technically really take main stage in 4th edition. I mean, they exist elsewhere, but really take main stage in 4th edition. And I always really like them to have like, oh, they're humanoids that are elemental based, which is very fun. I was like, I want to see more of that. I really like that concept, and it sticks out a little bit different from some of the other fantasy ancestries that we play with. Like, I kind of want to delve into that more with my setting. So Genasi are a big one, and then Tieflings are the other big one. And there are aspects into, and I can't remember if I've shown this on stream or not. There is a chart that I have, which is both where each of these ancestries kind of shows up in the world. One of the things that's very important in my world setting when I was building is I didn't want a lot of monocultures, meaning like, oh, this is the elf area, and this is the human area, and this is where the dwarves live. Instead, everybody's very much mixed in together. And so it's not ancestries that typically determine overall culture, but there are ancestries that are more populous in one place over the other, and on the entire broad scale, there are ancestries where there are just more humans than Genasi and Tieflings. There are not that many Genasi and Tieflings in the world. Part of that is because the Genasi have kind of been partially eradicated, unfortunately. We did a little ethnic cleansing, unfortunately, on some Genasi in the history of this world, which ties into, because they're tied to the elements and tied to the elemental chaos in the world, which people are very fearful of because it's very tied to wild magic, which harms people in this world. I think I talked about this last time we streamed. I was talking about that I did a lore dump a little bit in my game where I talked about, magic has this thing that happens for a lot of normal people, especially wild magic, is that it works a little bit like radiation in the world. And so for the normal person, if they spend a lot of time around magic, they tend to get really sick and they can die from it. So when you have the Genasi are so closely tied to the chaos magic that people were incredibly fearful of them, still are in the world in a lot of places. So they kind of tried to eradicate them from existence because they were so afraid of them. And tieflings are tieflings. The people have less problems with tieflings than they do with the Genasi, which is very funny. I should have put these in alphabetical order. I don't know why they're not. They might be in order of how prevalent they are in the world. Maybe. That may be how these are organized. If I did that at all. I think that may be how they're organized anyways. So those are the primary races or ancestries in the world. So if you play these ancestries, you're going to get a little extra something, both usually something mechanical, plus your character's going to be integrated a lot more into the world in very specific ways, and more like cultural and social ways that people are going to have an understanding with you. So again, this is very much a work in progress that I have not done a ton of work on, but I have added one thing this week, that I had been planned for a little while, and I just finally wrote it down. And then I have a second thing that I was like, oh, well, I have something that I want to add, and I was like, I'm going to wait and do that on stream. We'll do it together. So we can see up here that humans, they don't really got a lot going on. I guess we'll go through the things first, and then we'll get into the mechanical stuff. So we got in here the maturity, they mature at about 20. I'll change some of this stuff. Some of this stuff is stuff that I just boilerplate, just kind of dragged and dropped directly from D&D. I'll probably change some of this because I think life expectancy of 100 for humans is not really consistent. It's not even consistent today, much less what is a pseudo medieval Renaissance time period. For sure. Hallmarks are kind of like, what are the things they're kind of known for? The people go, oh, well, the things that usually we do in most TTRPG systems where we have other fantasy or sci-fi ancestries, races, will be like, oh, well, humans are the versatile ones. They're the ones that are just kind of the jack of all trades. We're just kind of good at stuff because it's hard as humans not having another sort of sentient race in reality to be like, oh, these are the things we're good at, and these are the things that another alien race is good at. Be able to kind of self-identify that. So instead we're just like, we're kind of okay at stuff, and then we kind of become the boilerplate or default standard, and then we build other ancestries off of humans because that's the only one we have real actual personal experience with. And transmutation. This is one of those things where it's like, I don't remember when I wrote down transmutation especially what I meant. I'm guessing magic. I guess that they're good at transmutation magic, but they're the only ones that have. Well, they're not the only ones, but they're one of the few that has anything that's specific about a school of magic. So this may come, this may go. I'm not sure. So every ancestry is going to have a hallmark, or a couple of hallmarks, an animal affinity, a material affinity, a weapon affinity, and then sort of like their relations with the other primary ancestries in this world setting. And you can graph this out if you ever played, I think it's one of the civilizations. Is it 4? where you have the map of relations between all the different civilizations. I think that's in 4, which I'm sure nowadays very few people have played. Anyways, you basically make a big nice ring, and you're like, okay, those who are most familiar with each other are close to each other, and the ones that are furthest away from each other go on the other side of the ring. And so that kind of gives you an idea of, in general kind of race relations between the different fantasy ancestries that are in the world. So they're close to dwarves and they're close to elves, but they're far from half-elves and Goliaths. This is again where we in this setting, I'm leaning into the trope where elves and humans both don't really like half-elves, where half-elves are a reminder of bad times, whether that's that's capital R monkey apes, or war, or whatever it is, or mixing of bloods, whatever you want to call it, as the 2 ancestries in this world that can interbreed. They don't look super kindly upon the interbreeding, unfortunately. They're also pretty far from Goliaths, and they're also on the other side, and somewhat ostracized. So their animal affinity, I went with dogs, of course, because what is man's best friend? A dog. It is the species we have domesticated the longest, which is very interesting because it's not a species we get food from, which is very interesting. Almost every other domesticated species we eat, with the exception of pretty much dogs and horses in most cultures. And we definitely eat dogs and horses in some cultures. So I went with dogs as their sort of like animal affinity. So how this plays out is that if I ever throw a human in there and I decide I want to add a little something extra to them, or I want them to have some sort of pet or animal ally or something like that, it's probably going to be a dog if they're humans. Makes sense. Humans use guard dogs. They use hunting hounds. We use dogs for looking for survivors and sniffing for bombs and drugs and all these other stuff. Like we have a very close relationship with this other species, animal. The material affinity is metal. This is a little bit interesting, and I think where it devolves a little bit, where dwarves are typically in fantasy known as being the master metalsmiths, which is weird because then you look at the Lord of the Rings and like elves are kind of, because they're the ones who make the rings. So they're actually the master metalsmiths, but also dwarves are famed for their metalwork, but they don't have mithril shirts, and so it's already kind of an inversion. But when you go back to things like the Nibelung saga, the Ring saga, and Wagner and all those sorts of things, is like it is dwarves that are generally known for their metalworking. But I wanted to make it humans because dwarves already have a thing that they're good at that we're about to get to as soon as we finish humans, because they also have something else they're well known for. And the weapon affinity, I was like, I gotta do blades. Humans gotta have swords. It has to be swords for humans. It's things, right? Knighthoods, samurai, warrior classes, well known, kind of known. I mean, samurai are technically came because they were they were horse archers, but became more known for the katana than their archery over time, anyways. So I figured blades made the most sense to me. I liked it. Stick with it. And we talked about the relations already. So I know that, like, if I'm going to have humans that have weapons in them, they're probably going to have blades. If I need to make a blacksmith, and people are like, well, we need to go to a blacksmith, and this is the opportunity where I can throw in 2 blacksmiths, and they'd be like, oh, there's a half-elf blacksmith and a human blacksmith. Most people go to the human blacksmith, but he also does charge higher rates, because there is this sort of, like, built-in stereotype that he's going to be a better smith. He or she. And or whatever, will be a better smith because they're human. Leaning right into the stereotypes by saying, obviously, that it will be a man who is the smith. So sometimes we lean in, sometimes we lean away. So that's humans. And like right now, I don't have a very mechanical thing to deal with them because humans are probably the hardest ones to come up with that for. And I thought of maybe doing like everybody's second best friend, but then that doesn't work with half-elves and Goliaths. I don't know. I don't know how I feel about it. This is why I haven't filled it out yet. Nothing's really jumped out at me and inspired me to do so. So dwarves, we have the life expectancy 350. I don't think I put in maturity because I think they also put maturity at like 20, and I was like, makes sense. So again, these life expectancies and like, actually, it may just not have it in the D&D 5e. It might not just say when they reach maturity. I can't remember. It's been I made this document. To be clear, I made this document a long time ago. Like years ago. I don't remember all of it. What are their hallmarks for dwarves? Determination, aka stubbornness, and infrasound, which is this is the other thing that I added this week. So infrasound is the thing that elephants do, and I like to pull some of this stuff from like real world stuff. And I was thinking about what's a cool thing that could kind of be the dwarf thing. So if you play a dwarf, you get this thing in my world, in addition to normal dwarf stuff. So the way that it works for the elephants is they are able to communicate with their trunks through the ground. They use basically infrasonic, so very low sound waves in the same way that like whale calls work. And that works through the earth and is picked up by other elephants' feet and up to sometimes 20 miles away. And they can communicate, they can't have like full conversations, but they can communicate pretty general ideas. Like the same as if you had a number like military like bugle calls, something like that. Like you can be like, "Oh, I'm lost," or which is one of the things they do. "Oh, it's time to move," or "There's danger in the area," things like that. They can speak some very specific things, and I wanted to do this because I thought this would be a super good, useful trait for people who tropically, as the trope goes, lives underground and could get very much just like lost in the like underdark caverns and be like in tunnels, the myriad tunnels of under earth that they create. That's like an ant farm almost. To have something where they can be like they can reach out and be like, "I am lost, and where are you? Can I find you?" And they can do that through the stone and earth, and they can communicate with each other. So here's kind of the specifics. I'm still working on it. They can communicate using infrasonic throat vocalizations. And I thought this is more of like a Mongolian throat singing, like they're kind of like kind of thing that they do. And they can communicate it through the air. They can be heard by other dwarves up to, and I just use the terms that I use for my own hex mapping. The one local hex are about 2 nautical miles away, which is not quite 2.5 miles. They can communicate through earth and stone for 1 county hex, or about 10 nautical miles, which is, 13 miles or something like that. They can do it through a metal rail or wire, like a string telephone or tin can telephone method. Actually, I'm just going to change that. That's technically a tin can. So this is cool because that means when I make tunnels in the world where there are dwarves that are dwarven made, that there is this idea where it's like they can have this basically wire system, communication system that they can use. And that way, now, typically using the tin can method, you can only go a few miles doing that, which is already very impressive just with like a string and cans. But like if they have it set up where they have like very thin like metal wire, or they're using like a rail, a long rail to communicate this, they can do it up to a region hex or 60 nautical miles, which is like 72 statute or normal miles. So they can have this long sort of like almost telephone network underground that they can use. It could be above ground too, but people would definitely just, probably screw up that network if it was above ground. So if it's in the air, it's picked up by their ears. If it's through matter, through that earth and stone or the rail or anything like that, they needs to be picked up through flesh, usually their forehead, their hands, or their feet. So now I'm thinking, okay, so now there's like a cultural societal thing where like dwarves place their foreheads against stones or against you see that thing where in old like westerns where there's like the Native Americans / Indian tracker who like puts their ear to the ground, that kind of thing, except they might take their shoes off and stand there, or they might get down and like kowtow and like press their hands and forehead against the ground so they can feel for vibrations. So, and then we introduce tremor sense. It works like tremor sense, essentially. But they have to do it like with their skin. So they can't be wearing gloves, they can't do it through their boots. They have to like take these things off to do it. So the downside of this, and most of the things that I've introduced that are like a mechanical thing have a pretty, not significant, but a notable downside to them. And it's that this infrasonic communication is omnidirectional, unless you're using the wire, then it's not. But through the stone and through the air, it's omnidirectional, meaning any infrasound and tremor sense creatures can detect direction, approximate distance, and messaging if they speak Dwarven. So that gives you the idea, is like, when you do this, if you are lost underground, it's dicey, because you could do this, and then you can have like things like Underdark creatures like Drow, might have things like monitoring equipment to pick up the dwarf and Dwargar infrasound. You could be a dwarf and be under there and try to do your infrasound, and it might get picked up by Dwargar, who might come and get you too, or might respond to you pretending to also be dwarves. So you have to be careful. But it also means that dwarves are really great at communicating on the surface over long distances, because most surface creatures don't have the ability to pick up that sound, or because it's infrasound, which means that they can't hear it in the air. And most surface creatures don't have tremor sense, so they don't have the ability to pick it up through the vibrations. So dwarves have a very distinct advantage about being able to communicate with each other over very long distances by doing that. But once you get underground, there's a lot more things that have tremor sense. And there are a lot more things that speak Dwarven, unfortunately. And also fight and kill dwarves. So it's very dangerous to use in something like the Underdark. And then I wanted to make sure, it's like, this is a question for myself later that I can use if a situation for it comes up. It's like, do Underdark creatures like Drow, Mind Flayers, things like that, do they have monitoring equipment to pick up Dwarf and Dwargar infrasound? And can this equipment, if they have it, identify the message? Like, are they able to tell by the frequency or whatever it is? Can they translate it to be like, I'm looking for friends or danger or whatever it is? That's just a question for me. That's later world building I can do in play. Be like, oh, they went down in the Underdark, they're thinking about using this thing, and it's like, being in the Underdark is dangerous because there's lots of creatures that have tremor sense, plus there are intelligent creatures like Drow and Mind Flayers, and there's a chance they might have items that allow them to pick up those vibrations, pick up the infrasound. They have instruments that'll do it, and potentially be able to identify the messaging. Which makes sense, because basically everybody in the Underdark slaves. Take slaves, so they would probably use that to capture dwarves and Dwargar for slaves, because that's what they do. Because everybody in D&D is slavers. Everybody evil takes slaves. So their animal affinity for dwarves are primarily raptors, and by that I don't mean the dinosaur. I mean birds of prey, and other birds as well. So we lean into the underground, doing things like mine canaries, to check for poisonous gas and stuff like that. As well as using raptors. And I liked raptors as a thing, like very mountainous. Birds of prey are very mountainous in general. So that could be everything from like large condors. And I guess condors technically aren't birds of prey. But falcons, hawks, eagles, those sorts of things. So if you're going into town and you're looking for whatever reason a falconer, then if there's an opportunity to get a dwarf falconer or speak to a dwarf falconer about getting a trained raptor for you, that's probably the person you want to talk to, because they're probably much better at it than any of the other ancestries. Again, those are stereotypes that we're leaning into. They may or may not, based on the individual person, but the likelihood is that they will probably be better at it than somebody else. And their material affinity, we said that we weren't going to give them metals because we gave metals to the humans, so instead they have stones and rock. Which makes sense. Dwarves have stone cunning and all that stuff, so we don't really need to... They already have that stuff. So they're well known as great masons and architects, and, and they called it a mine for Moria kind of stuff. Which is all very much stone rock architecture. And we could also throw in things like concrete there. Essentially, like doing cement. I think, because I don't think I gave concrete to anybody else. If so, I would have probably given it to humans, and I didn't do that. So, arguably, you could say that tieflings have it. Maybe. We'll get there. The weapon affinity, of course, is axes and hammers, because they're dwarves. And they already get that stuff, so there's no... Sometimes you don't need to mess with stuff that's already there. You already have the stone cunning, you already have dwarven weapon proficiency, we'll just lean into that, we'll do that stuff. The relations, they're close to humans and saurids. And they're far from Goliaths and... we put gnomes and halflings here, that's before I changed the title to halfers. No! Here we go. Halfers. We changed it to halfers. So, dwarves in general, right, and it makes sense. Why do they like humans? Well, humans and dwarves, the same reason why we like dwarves is the same reason why dwarves like humans. Over something like elves. They like saurids because they are kind of cold and factual. I think they really appreciate that. And they have that same sort of like stubbornness, determination that dwarves do. They don't like Goliaths. Goliaths typically also kind of mountainous people. So there's probably a lot of history there as far as competing for the same sorts of lands, resources, and things like that. So sort of a long time grudge in the same way that dwarf, probably not as stereotypical as like we typically see with dwarves and orcs or goblins. Which usually they have like a almost a racial enmity against them. So not quite that, but they don't get along usually. And they don't really like the halfers because you look at the bon vivant lifestyle, right? They just want to eat food, and they're kind of lazy, and they don't really do things. And dwarves are like, oh, well, we are industrious and we're about work, and we're very serious people, and halfers are generally not very serious people. And we move on to elves. Mature at 100, life expectancy 70 to 50, etc., etc. So this is the one, I think I've talked about this before, because I do currently have an elf playing in my campaign. And then we run a little fun campaign every once in a while on when the other game I play in doesn't play. Sometimes we have a little side game where we're kind of doing like a co-DM, no-DM kind of hex crawl, just kind of fart around kind of game. We just kind of pick up and play every once in a while. And we have two elves in that party. And originally it was just two party members, just me and a friend. We just got together and played it. We've added a third person to that game. who's not an elf. But when it was just the two of us as elves, man, does it make a huge difference when you only have to take a long rest for 4 hours. You get a lot more done in a day. We're like, oh yeah, we just travel faster, and we can catch up with just about anybody who tries to get away from us because we get 4 extra hours of travel time in a day. Or if we need to get away from people, we get 4 extra hours of travel time in a day. So it's incredibly useful. So one of the things that's very important about elves, I wanted to lean into sort of like their ethereal beauty kind of thing in an almost weird way. So for this, I made it that non-elves suffer face blindness when talking to elves. People who are not elves have a very difficult time telling elves apart by the look of their face. Because when you think about it, think their body types, like elves are always kind of got the same body type. They generally have very sort of traditionally beautiful faces. They generally kind of have the same length of hair. Like, go back and look at The Lord of the Rings and look at elves standing next to each other and be like, could you really tell those people apart if they were really that ancestry? Like, they already, even as just humans dressing up to look like them, look very similar. And so the idea being that for non-elves are incredibly difficult, almost impossible. They have face blindness. They can't tell them apart. And so, and there's also a thing with elf ends, because elves don't need to sleep. So their ends look very different. Which we can add that stuff in. So most elves wear a unique mark in mixed ancestry areas, which are most areas, to identify themselves. And there's tattoos, pieces of custom jewelry. Some of them wear masks, etc. The more temporary or easy to duplicate, the more suspicious they are. So there are a lot of elves who just have tattoos simply as a way to identify themselves to other people in mixed company. It kind of leans into, there's some weird, almost Holocausty kind of vibes there with the tattoos, identification tattoos, but also at the same time, it's like this weird necessary evil with people, because it's actually worse for you if you don't. So if people come across elves who don't have some sort of identifiable marker on them, they're immediately suspicious of them, because they have no idea if this person who's telling them that they are this person is who they say to be. But it also means that they're incredibly good at things like deception checks or impersonation. They're able to do that very easily. As long as they're not... The problem is that they are also trying to pretend to be another elf. So if they're pretending to be another elf, they also have to duplicate their unique mark, which may or may not be a thing. So there are magic items that allow you to have like shifting tattoos and stuff. Like, that's an incredibly powerful magic item for somebody like an elf in the world. As well as I think there are clothes that change the way they look. You have the cloak that changes how you look, which is a common item, I think. And the cloak of... Is it the cloak of many styles or something like that, where you can change how the cloak looks? And it's like a action. So having that sort of stuff is really, really powerful for them. So there is this idea that elves are in their own way very, very tied to like spycraft, because they're able to do this. But they're also at the same time also widely distrusted because they don't have a mark. And when elves introduce themselves in mixed company, the sort of general propriety is to show your unique mark when you introduce yourself. You might be like, my name is Aelwyn, and you show like the tattoo that's on your forearm or whatever that identifies you as that person, so the people can see it and be like, you are Aelwyn, okay. And so whenever you meet Aelwyn in 2 weeks, they walk up to you and start a conversation with you, and you're like, do I know you? They're like, I'm Aelwyn. They have to show you the mark again. You're like, ah, yes, I know who you are. But if they just introduced themselves and said, I'm Aelwyn, and didn't show their mark, the person would be like, that's weird. Can I see your mark? Right, they would probably not just trust that person. So yeah, I should also add a thing about elfins. Sorry, elfins, and we'll say singing bowls. Oh no, it drops it too. There we go. I don't want that on 2 lines. All right, so they have to wear the unique mark. The thing about elfins is they look like this is a very specific thing. I don't know why this ever jumped into my head. We can probably look for that. And you'll know what I'm talking about. Let me see. I'm looking for a very specific thing. Of course, it's only going to bring up stuff about the U.S. border crossing. I don't care about that. It's not really bringing up exactly what I want. That first result's pretty close, though. I like that. Ah, there's one. This little guy. This little guy right here. You see him right here? Do better. Ba-bow. Yeah. There we go. Can you open this? Switch a new tab. There we go. So their inns are weird. They're generally just outside. And they're basically a whole bunch of these little booths. Guard booths, if you would like. Arranged in just a giant circle facing each other. Because again, elves don't need to sleep. And they're awake the whole time, so they don't really need a ton of privacy, exactly. So they don't need a place where they can lay down. So they have these little booths that are basically like, here's a little covered place where you can sit for 4 hours. And the elfin will have a bunch of other elves, and then the idea is like, this is in a big ring so they can all see each other, so nobody's doing weird shenanigans. And then they can also see if anybody's sneaking up on their camp. Then usually there's like a fire or hearth in the middle of it. And usually in the center there's also a caller or a leader. What would traditionally be like an innkeeper? But one of the things that the elves in this world, most elves do, is that they have with them a singing bowl, like a, yeah, I guess, the Buddhist, right? Buddhist singing bowl? Yeah. Anyways, we'll pull it up. There you go. They usually have one of these little guys. And this is to help with their meditation work. So usually there's a group of them, they all do it together. And usually the person in the center is the lead. The innkeeper's kind of the lead for it. So you walk in, you pay your money, you grab a booth that usually has like a pillow or some other sort of padding in it, and there's a place to like store your stuff, like a little trunk or something. And then you sit down, pull out your bowl, and you do this for 4 hours. The cool thing is that I like about this is that when elves are traveling in the wild, especially if there's a group of them, you will hear them long before you ever see them. So it's also this weird kind of ward thing, like it keeps animals away because they're making noise, but it also like lets people know that there's a group of elves here. Generally, because the thing about singing bowls is because they all play the same harmonious sound, it's hard to determine. It's almost like Tusken Raider-esque, where when you hear the singing bowl, it's hard to determine how many singing bowls are being used at the same time, because they're all the same pitch. So it is like a Tusken Raiders where they all walk in a single line in the footsteps of the person before them, so you never know how many there are. So it's very weird. And you know that they're going to be awake, so if you try to sneak up to them, there's a high likelihood you're going to see them. So it's also a weird, like, it keeps animals away, but it also keeps things like bandits and attackers away, often. So that's just how we built it up. And we're looking at the next one. We're looking at the wrong document. There we go. So yeah, that's... with central fire/hearth. So yeah, it is. So in addition to areas or towns that they go into where there's a primarily elf population, it's more likely that they're going to have an elf inn rather than a human inn, or other humanoid inn, which is not super useful for other humanoids, but is very useful for elves. Then I'm gonna put it here. And like I said, I wanted to lean into sort of that European. That was a Polish guard box. The idea that they have like these big sort of like high visibility, like diagonal lines and colors on them and things like that. Like they're supposed to be easy to see. So the idea is that nobody should ever be accidentally stumbling upon an elf inn. Like everybody who's there is there on purpose and should come across it on purpose because they make a lot of sound and they're high visibility. So they know if there's somebody approaching that they're either coming as friends, as usually as elves, or they are definitely coming as like attackers or bandits. And they know if they hear a bunch of noise around there, it's probably not an animal because the sounds they make will keep them away. So this is but you only get this stuff in this world when you play as an elf. That's the idea, is we're kind of making that custom world building aspect of it. We're pulling that stuff in. That was our elves. Yeah, singing bowls. Now, I do make sure that it's like the elf that I have in my current campaign is like, you don't have to use the singing bowl if you don't want to. It's just a cool thing that happens in the world. You just need something. The idea is that there's something that helps you with your meditation. There's a cultural, right? We know there's, as I explained, there's this social cultural reason why they use the singing bowl. It's, in fact, a very practical thing why they do it. But if you want to just have like prayer beads or whatever it is, or you just light incense or whatever it is that helps you focus, like meditation, whether it's like candle meditation or something like that, doesn't matter. You can, as a player, you are free to make up whatever aid you want. And you can do all of that in addition to the singing bowl if you want. It's up to them. So their animal affinity is cats. I think that elves portray a lot of cat-like tendencies towards humans. They're somewhat mercurial. Their brains don't work quite the same. So, yeah, cats just make sense to me, and I like the idea of like they often live in the woods, so that includes jungle settings. So you're more likely to see them with things like ocelots or panthers or lions, tigers, not bears. But lions and tigers and small cats, bobcats, lynx, mountain lions, all sorts of stuff. Any sort of cat that would make sense for the area, or other sort of feline species. Now again, so that doesn't mean that that's the only kind of pets they can have. They can have dogs if they want. But when I'm thinking about specifically like NPCs that I'm going to throw in there and be like, oh, well, it's more likely that they will have a cat as a pet or ally than a dog or a bird, because dwarves are more likely to have the birds, which means that dwarves are more likely to have things like parrots, which is very funny. So we're playing in a kind of a tropical area right now, and I haven't thrown any dwarves in there with parrots yet, but I should do that. That will be fun. Or like cockatiels or something like that, some sort of like annoying bird that will talk back to people. Hopefully in Dwarvish. Hopefully it says only curse words in Dwarvish. Their material affinity, they're elves. They live in the woods. Of course it's going to be woods. They're famed for their woodworking. Not for making the rings of power, but for making fantastic wood. And when I lean into that, I think of things like Japanese joinery, which I should probably just add in here. Joinery, which is woodworking stuff. And if you're not familiar with woodworking, joinery is basically how joints, how you put pieces of wood together. And one of the big things that's very important about traditional Japanese joinery is that Japanese islands don't have a lot of metal on them, specifically iron. Very iron poor location in the world, which means that don't really use nails to put things together. So when you look at like the big traditional Japanese temples, most of those are made with very elaborate wood joinery, which doesn't use any metal at all to hold it together. They use like use a lot of like dowels and biscuits, and I'm using more woodworking terms that I don't expect anybody to know. They do a lot of things like the dovetails, etc. You don't need to know that stuff. I don't even really need to know that stuff. But yeah, so they're very good at that. So if you want something that's made like a wooden puzzle box or something like that, likely that it's either made by an elf or an elf one is of higher quality than you would otherwise find, and generally more expensive. But they are very good at working with wood. Their weapon affinity is, of course, bows. Leaning into the trope, there's no reason not to. Also works because they're masters with wood, then they would be masters of the weapon that is primarily wood. You could argue that spears, but bows more so, right? That really it's just this tiny little arrowhead. That's the only metal part when it comes to bows and arrows. And the relations are close to humans, and they're close to halfers. They're far from swords and half-elves. Half-elves for the obvious reasons we already talked about. And they're far away from swords, so your dragonborn, your lizard folk, etc. I think probably from the communal aspect, the things that kind of push them apart. Because I have the feeling that the elves in my world are pretty communal for the most part. To the point that they have their own specific types of inns. They're pretty communal people. And we'll move on to our swords. The mature at 18, life expectancy 80. As we talked about in the custom world that I have, swords are a combination of kind of dragonborn, lizardfolk, and yuan-ti, and any other sort of like reptilians. Troglodytes is one of the ones we said earlier. So all of those are kind of like wrapped under this one kind of ancestry. Even though you can play any of those mechanically as far as D&D is concerned. I don't care which one. But the idea is that they all kind of fall under this sword umbrella. And this is one of the ones that, like the humans, I haven't really come up with something for yet. So they combine that stuff. Their hallmarks is sort of a dislike of cities, and they avoid cold weather. Most of that's pretty standard for cold-blooded reptiles. Which means you're not going to come across a lot of them once you reach things like the boreal areas or the taiga areas. Where there just aren't a lot of reptiles because it gets too cold for them. Once you get either further north than that or further south. And they tend to be very solitary creatures. Tend to be. Now that said, there are for sure just like dragonborn areas where there are obviously like villages and cities and stuff. But in general, they are very independent. Put it that way. They're less communal. Again, sort of that difference between them and elves, where elves tend to be a little bit more communal. Their animal affinity, as you might guess, the ones that they're more likely to have as pets and allies are, of course, reptiles. Makes sense to me. Doesn't make sense to you? It probably should. Very straightforward. You'll see them with a lot of snakes. Love to give them like the Zentarum or Gentarum. flying snakes. That's a really cool one for them to have. That sort of like wraps around their arm or their neck or their shoulder and flies around them and stuff. That's a really cool pet to kind of just give a random sword in the world. So, what are their material affinities? Animal materials. They're really great at working with bone and sinew and hide and animal byproducts. This one, I'll have to change probably. I'll have to clarify. Because you could argue that animal byproducts include things like dairy, which I think is very not reptile. That's a very mammal thing. So anything that's like milk-based. So I'd have to be careful about that, but bone and sinew and hide, I think, work very well. Maybe I should just put meat. They work well with meat. So we're gonna, you know what? I'm just gonna go ahead and I'm just gonna make it clear for myself. This is kind of an etc. kind of thing. Because it also means things like ivory and stuff like that. So they're good with sort of animal materials. So we know if you want a high quality bow, you go to an elf to get high quality bows and arrows. But if you're looking for the string for that bow, and I should put it, that should be one of the ones on here. You would probably go to a sword if you can, hopefully to get a bowstring, because their bowstrings are probably going to be better. So then you have a cool thing where it's like, well, that may be one of the things that the elves dislike about the swords, is that the swords seem to be able to better make bowstrings than the elves can. But their weapon affinity is actually spears and staves, so staffs, spears, not bow. So they're like really good at making one part of the bow, but not kind of the other stuff aspect of it. Just because I think that spears and staves fits that more almost primal kind of feeling that I think you want to get out of reptilian style ancestries or races. You really want to see that. I think that's how most people lean into that, as do I. So I think having them have that very specific thing, and then having spearheads that are made out of things like horn. I guess I could put horn in there, right? Yeah. So I mean, there's a lot of stuff. We'll just leave it as animal materials. I'll put it down here. Which also, it is very funny because that does mean that swords are probably likely to be better trappers. Well, maybe not better trappers, but better at using what trappers find. So better at processing things like furs and hides into leather and felt and things like that. They're really good at that stuff. The funny part is that most trapping traditionally happens in colder areas, which would be not in the area that they would spend a lot of time in. Though if you did come across one in there, that would probably be what they were doing. Is they'd probably be like furriers or trappers. Or other, I would have to go back and watch something like Jeremiah Johnson or something like that. Watch one of those movies, and like Mountain Men. Like, okay, how do I make a sword feel like that? What would a sword one of those look like? It makes sense because they're very independent, so they don't mind spending a bunch of time isolated by themselves off in the wilderness. But it is something that they don't do in the winter. Alright, and the relations, they're close to dwarves, we already talked about that. Close to half-elves, I think, is also people, as a type of person, as a type of ancestry that's often misunderstood or lesser understood than some of the other ancestries. And that's very much how half-elves are dealt with sort of in this world. And they're far from elves, as we talked about, and they're far from our gnomes and halflings that I've already changed their name. Document. I had already changed the name, I just hadn't changed the name of the document to halfers. So I have to figure out what is the sort of mechanical thing I want to give them at some point. I'm not sure yet. I'm not sure what that mechanical thing will be. I really like the one that's for lizard folk in 5e, where they're just really good at crafting like basic items out of animal materials, and so that works really, really well. But most of the things is when I want to add something mechanical in it, what I'm trying to do with this world building is there generally needs to be some kind of drawback to it or some sort of downside to it. Like, it's good. That's the thing that kind of makes them a hallmark, but also there's things that kind of pull back from that. Like with the elves having the face blindness, and so people are often very suspicious of elves. So I'd have to figure out what that means for that. I could maybe do communication where I treat like Dragonborn or other sword languages as kind of like druidic, in fact but make it mechanically difficult because their mouths are shaped differently, that it's hard for them to speak mammal languages, but in the same way mammals can't really speak their language, and so there's kind of a consistent language barrier. I don't know if I want to do that. Maybe or maybe not. So it is kind of a hidden language in a lot of ways. Like, there are a lot of people, it's almost like a Latin situation, where it's like a lot of people can read it, but nobody really knows how to speak it. Maybe that's the situation. Like, and maybe they know how to speak it, but they can't speak it. They can't actually speak it. And so even if you try to pretend to be a sword, if you're a human or an elf or something, and you're like, I'm going to use disguise self or whatever, and how to disguise, etc., to pretend to be this dragonborn guy that we're trying to impersonate, and be like, yeah, but you can't actually speak the language. Like, I know that you know the language, but your mouth can't, because your mouth is still your mouth, you can't make those sounds. And so somebody, if you talk to another sword, they're going to be like, you are not this person. Which is, it reminds me very much, I had a high school teacher from Belgium who was talking about sort of underground resistance fighters during World War II. We talked about, oh, well, there were a couple of different phrases they could use in Flemish, which is the native language, that is like the only people who can say it correctly are people who are native-born Flemish speakers. And so they could use that as like a passcode, so they knew that they would never get infiltrated by sort of like a German anti-terror, anti-spy kind of person, anti-resistance fighter, trying to pretend to be them to infiltrate them, to go undercover within their organization, because they would never be able to say the passphrase correctly. Which is very interesting. So you could do something like that. I'm not going to write that down, but I'm gonna try to lock that one away. Maybe I'll use that one for later, because it could be fun. I don't know if that's powerful enough compared to some of the other things that I have in here. And we did that. So we have our halfers. So they mature at about 30, so they mature a little bit slower than humans do. They live to 300. Well beyond the 71st. Which now you look at Bilbo and you're like, you're retiring at 11st? Dang, man, you still got like 2/3 of your life to live. What are you doing? That's pretty early retirement. Like retiring at like 35, man, as a human. Like, that'd be nice, but just probably not likely. So it combines gnomes, halflings, kinder, and basically any short race. Or short ancestry, I should say. We're changing that language. Short ancestry. Kind of all get bunched up. Kinders, all that stuff kind of get... You can be in... mechanically, you can be any of those ancestries when you're playing it. But you technically are a halfer within the world. The world doesn't see you any differently. But mechanically, you can be differently. I would also allow somebody, if they wanted to play Goblin, and maybe they wanted only to play Goblin for like Nimble Escape or some sort of mechanical reason, And be like, well, you could play just a halfer, we'll just reskin it and be like, you're a heifer who just mechanically is a goblin. So their hallmarks, they're brave and sneaky, they live that bon vivant lifestyle, which ranges from sort of like bucolic all the way to hedonistic, which means that bucolic would be very much like how the Shire is, that's a very bucolic setting, but all the way to sort of like hedonism, like high hedonism of like late Rome. Well, I guess not. Yeah, I guess late Rome. You're talking about your Caligula, Nero-esque eras where there's lavish parties and it's sex and drugs and rock and roll all the way down. So halflings are very much on that side. So their animal affinity is rodents. We have a, and this one has come up. So they're more likely to have rodents as their pets or allies or things like that. That's what our affinity means. So in the current campaign I'm running, we have Pearl, who is a heifer courtesan, and she has a capybara. That's her pet, named Clovis. He's a big old rat. Well, I mean, he's a capybara, but he's a big old rat. So it was very easy because I knew I wanted to give her something to kind of make her a little bit more memorable, and it worked. I threw a capybara down, and the players were like, "Oh, that's very cute," and gave him a name. And they've had to rescue him after he was capybara napped for ransom previously. That's sort of a one-shot side mission that they ran off to do. Their material affinity is flora. That means basically anything plant-based, which means that they're exceptionally good at agriculture. So keep that in mind, which very much fits into the sort of like the bucolic Shire kind of. I mean, let's be honest, that's the only people you see raise crops in Lord of the Rings. You don't see crops anywhere else. They're never at the farm anywhere else. They're always just walking over plains and through mountains and forests and across rivers, but not really once they get out of the Shire. They're really not going through a lot of farmsteads anymore. They're really good at that. That also means they're really great at being like weavers and things like that. So yeah, that's their sort of material affinity. So basically, what I should put down here is like not wood or non-wood, because that is very specific. That feels good enough to separate because wood is such a versatile thing for construction and building materials. It's a robust material for making things, for tool work. Whereas flora allows us to do things, like I said, they make a lot of baskets. That also means that they're really good at textiles. They're really good at cotton, jute, linen, all that stuff. So if you want to buy now, that doesn't include silk, because that doesn't come from flora. So, but heifers are probably well known for their like toile and other sorts of things. Anything that kind of comes from that. But yeah, they do a lot of hemp. Probably well known for making really good rope. Well, hemp rope anyway. It's not silk rope, because that would be somebody else technically. We haven't gone over yet. So yeah, that's their sort of material affinity. They're good at reeds and rushes, and it also means that because they're good at this, they're generally pretty good cooks, for the most part. Now, a sword, depending on how we go with this, a sword might be better at cooking meat, technically. We said potentially meat for them as the material. They might be better at, like, butchering animals and seasoning meat. They cook a mean steak. But these guys are gonna make you the best bread you've ever had in your life. And their weapon affinity are daggers and slings. I think that makes sense. They're small, so they have to be small weapons. Slings is a very rustic kind of provincial weapon, both very easy to make, very useful, very cheap to produce. Literally uses rocks that you can find on the ground, though specific rocks. or sling bullets, which are also very easy to make and find. So they have a close relation to the elves. I think the elves kind of see halfers primarily as, these silly little creatures. They're silly little creatures. Little jovial, silly creatures. And I think the Goliaths like them. I think the Goliaths, well, right, that's right, because the Goliaths are probably going to be the ones that are best at dairy, now that I think about it. Which makes sense. So yeah, so they're very close to each other. Goliaths. Yeah, so actually Goliaths are probably the better butchers now that I think about it. Because they're going to have most of the meat products. I mean, it's weird. There's some overlap there. I have to think about that stuff. But yeah, I would definitely say the Goliaths make the better steak. Let's put it that way. But daggers and slings makes it very easy. They're close to elves. They're close to Goliaths. They're far from dwarves and swords. Swords and dwarves are both too serious, not fun to hang out with. They don't want to spend a lot of time with them. Goliaths are very sort of like rustic people like they are, and the elves find them intriguing, and so they, I think, often want to be intriguing for them. They kind of like, they're happy to be sort of like the center stage jester kind of for them, I think, maybe. But this is the people that I wanted to add the thing for. So we're gonna add this in here. We're gonna say life of the party. Is that the one I'm gonna go to? We do that? No, I'm gonna do money talks. That's sort of the name, ribbon name for this ability. And so the thing that I came up with them is that, and theirs just has a built-in downside, is that it costs them money. Is they can +1 to, and this is a very, very mechanical one. I want to make sure I get the language right on this. 2 charisma checks. And social settings. For each... oh, it's got a very specific name. What is the specific name of this? I'm going to look it up real quick. What's the specific name for that? Lifestyle expenses. That's the name of it. I lost my place. Where was I? Oh, there we go. For each day of targets, expenses they spend. So the idea is like they throw around money. They're very social. They're very free with their money. They can throw around their money to increase their social standing very easily. So this is based off of the target of who they're trying to talk to's lifestyle expenses. So lifestyle expenses. I'm gonna pull this up. I got the Roll20 up. Just to give you an idea. Come on, load. There we go. So lifestyle expenses is like they're kind of like roughly per day. This is what you spend to kind of like live in the world. So if you want to talk to squalid people, people who are like untouchable levels, like beggars in the street, basically. Though technically that could be wretched, but I would probably use the squalid. You only need to spend 1 silver for every +1 you want to get to that roll. So I think this is one of those situations where you need to... This is a very 5e thing where it can be applied after rolling, but before knowing the result. So they don't know. So like say you're in this social situation I'm trying to think of a social situation in which you would be talking to a beggar. Maybe in like the, I guess maybe in the marketplace or granary or something like that. Like it has to be a social situation. Maybe let's say like at the granary or storehouse. Like people are in the bread line. You get their daily grain allotment. And so you've got the beggar there, and they're there. They can throw around some money. They're giving out maybe like an alms to the poor kind of thing. To loosen the beggar's tongues, kind of get them on their side. Be like, I rolled, let's say a 12. I'm like, I don't think 12's enough. I really would like to have a 20, so I'm going to add a +8. So I'm going to spend 8 silver pieces to be like, well, I buy some extra stuff. I buy some extra bread or stuff for the people in line. Maybe I'm giving out some copper pieces to everybody who's in line. And that loosens up the person's tongue as they see that, like, oh, this person cares about me, etc. Now I can get that. So it's a very specific thing. And that's great. You can really do that very easily. And the nice thing I like about this is that this works for a halfer regardless of whether you're playing a charismatic character or not. Like you could be playing a halfling with a -1 charisma and still be able to make really good social charisma checks by throwing around cash. Now, the more important people you try to influence, the more expensive that gets very quickly. So if you get to somebody who's, let's say like a tradesperson, I'd put that at probably somewhere between modest and comfortable, so 1 to 2 gold pieces a day. So if you rolled really low and you're trying to get maybe sow some rumors or something like that, you might need to spend 10, 15 gold, make it happen, which in the grand scheme of things is not a big thing. But it is something, and it's a cool thing that only they get to do in the world. This is something cool they get to do. And then, you get into things like aristocratic. If you want to impress people who are like nobility, kings, royals, that's a 10 gold piece minimum a day. So minimum. So that's like, at the minimum, if you want to impress basically a lord or lady or knight, like the bottom level of nobility, you want to add maybe a little +5 to your check, you got to spend at least 50 gold. And let's say it's maybe like a king or something like that, I might be like, well, that's maybe like 100 gold for a +1. You're like, oh, we really need this king on our side. We didn't roll great. It also means that there are situations where you might not have the face talk in very specific situations. Maybe you have a bard in your party, and you're like, yeah, the bard will probably roll really, really well. But there is a chance that he might roll badly. But the halfer might, in the party, who's, let's say, I don't know, a rogue or something like that, they might be able to get it done even if they roll low, if we allow them to just spend a bunch of party money to influence the king. So that means it's like, oh, we're bringing in like entertainment for this. We're throwing like a banquet for this king. We're bringing in like musicians and an acting troupe and all this other stuff, and be like, yeah, we basically throw a party. You throw a party for this king. You throw a big feast for him. You spend a bunch of money, and you get in his good graces by doing that, and you're able to get this social roll goes through, this charisma roll goes through. But also at the same time, when you don't know what the result's going to be, you don't know how much to add to it, so they're more likely to overspend rather than underspend. Because you don't want to spend, let's say we're going to influence that king. We're like, well, I want to get like, I think a 20 should do it. And I'm like, hey, I think the DC is probably like 22 or 25 or something like that. Like this is a big ask for the king. Like you're asking them for a huge favor, and you don't really know him. He has no reason to kind of do this for you. You're like, well, we spent like 1,000 gold to get a +10, but we didn't to get that DC 20. Then I have to be like, well, unfortunately, you have ingratiated yourself with the king, but the king is not yet ready to grant whatever it is you're asking the king for. He needs a little more. He needs you to do something for him, probably. And then we spin that off, and now it's its own side quest. Done and done. Easy peasy dungeon mastery. So yeah, that's the thing that I wanted to run in. So that one's got a very specific thing. And that's the one that I wanted to add. I think there's still maybe some more to add to this or tweak it some. But that's the general idea I have for this sort of power right now is that, hey, if you decide to play a gnome or a halfling or whatever in this world, in addition to all the normal stuff you get, you also get this money talks ability that allows you to get this, to pay basically for bonuses to your roll, for charisma rolls. So if you decide to play a halfling bard in my setting, now that I'm thinking about it, like you're going to be really OP. Like halfling bards are like well known. But they're also well known as partiers and for throwing money around. So that means that they're probably very successful. They're probably ingratiated themselves with very important, powerful people. So that can make them a really cool bad guy for me too. If I want to make a halfling a halfer a bad guy in my campaign at some point, is they can actually poison public opinion against the player characters, against the group. Be definitely not something I'd ever do, but would definitely do. Kind of make sure that that'd be a fun way to get around them. For most parties who maybe only have like one character who's good at charisma stuff. Yeah, that's everything for them. Half elves, born of two races, loved by neither. They cannot mate outside their race. I mean, we'll change that to ancestry because we've changed the language now in D&D. So we'll just follow along suit. So they're born of two races, loved by neither. A classic half elf thing where it's like, I'm a person in between two worlds, kind of thing. The idea is that they cannot mate outside of that. So that means that, like, unless a half elf is having sex with another half elf, there is a 0 chance of either party potentially getting knocked up, getting pregnant. Which means that half elves make very, very popular brothel workers. So, do with that what you will. And since there are things like, I already talked about the halfer courtesan there, the courtesans are more likely to be half elves. Now, the person I just talked about was a halfer, not a half elf. But that's also because they're, well, that's what I rolled, based off of where people are in the world. She's also a courtesan. She's not a lowly sort of like streetwalker. She's a high class lady. So their animal affinity, I decided to go with false dogs, so things that are kind of like dogs but not dogs, which felt very much like kind of like human, not like human, very, very on theme. That includes things like foxes, hyena, jackals, tanuki, things of that nature. Lots of fun there. So if you have half elves, they're likely to have those kinds of animals, more likely than not to use as like pets and allies in fighting. Their material affinity is waste or recycling. They do a lot of upcycling, which means they're really good at, this is weird stuff, like they're really great at making fertilizer. That's how we can interpret that. We can also interpret that as they're really great at taking things that are repairing things. We'll put repair on there as well. Why not? They're really great at repairing things. So they're really good tinkerers in a lot of ways. But it means that they're good at that kind of stuff. If you wanted to look for other things as waste, recycling, repair, and we'll go ahead and put upcycling here. I would interpret this as them being really good at making artistic things like mosaics, where you have basically broken tiles that you're making into art. They would be really good at that. That's sort of one of the things that they're very well known for. I also like the idea that maybe they make what are those things called? Earth ships? as like homes and things like that. Right? That's what it's called, right? That's what an Earthship is. Right? Yeah, autonomous passive solar. I'm designed to be completely off-grid using natural and recycled material. Yeah. So doing weird stuff like this, like these are the sort of things that they would make. Where they use a lot of recycled materials and stuff. A lot of traditional kind of medieval-esque walls often have a lot of filler in the middle of them because they need to be wide for the most part. So there's often a lot of like just crud that's kind of they pack in between like essentially two curtain walls and then a bunch of stuff they pack in the middle. So they would be good at making those types of wood, those types of walls and other structures. I'd have to think a little bit more about other ways that might come in, but again, like fertilizer and stuff like that, where they take waste and upcycle it or turn it into other things to grade. I would also consider like if we're looking about waste or repair or something like that, or decomposition, that also means that they might be pretty good at brewing and distillation. Potentially, they might be very good at that. Even though you could argue that halfers, because of their sort of flora function, would also be very, very good at that stuff. Even though you can make basically like beer and wine from like the rinds of old fruit and bits of stale bread and those kinds of things. In those kind of ways, maybe half elves are better at that kind of aspect of that. And for their weapons, their weapon affinity, of course, you've seen them staying on theme here. They are using crossbows, which are both a weapon that is both a bow made with wood and also a metal contraption. So you see them have that affinity from both their sort of parentages, ancestries, for their affinity for metal and affinity for wood. They have close relations to swords. We talked about them as both being kind of outsider ancestries and Goliath. Why would they be super friendly with Goliath? I don't know if I have a very specific reason for them. Some of these things, like you have very clear ideas when we're making that map, that ring map. I'll have to bring it up someday and show you guys what that sort of ancestry relation map kind of looks like. I'm not going to do it now, though. Bring those up, and I'm trying to think of... They may have just landed there just because I knew that they would be close to swords, and I didn't know who was going to be next to swords. It would be on the other side of them. And that just ends up to be where Goliath kind of fell. And we'll change Goliath to Giantkin. I should probably do that across all of it, but... And... Did I spell it correctly? Giantkin. And they're far from humans and elves, obviously, because we talked about their background and the kind of born of two races, loved by neither aspect of them. To the point where it's kind of like as the ancestries are sort of like arranged geographically in the world, is that there are a lot of places where half-elves are kind of away from humans and elves, where they've either been kind of driven away or have decided to basically not quite a diaspora, that's more the Genasi thing, but have decided to move away from them. And half-elves, at least in this setting, I thought about making them like mules, where they're basically born of two different parents, two different species parents, but aren't able to actually breed themselves. And I was like, that doesn't make sense. There wouldn't be enough half-elves in the world. They don't like them enough. We have mules in the world because we want mules. Not because mules happen, and if we dislike mules, there would definitely not be mules in the world. But there are. And we know because we want there to be. So the only way for there to be half-elves in the world and where there are people who actively don't want half-elves in the world would probably be because they can actually breed. So they can't. That's why I made that decision. Base there. So yeah, I don't know what specific power I want to make with the half-elves yet. like I said, a lot of these are kind of they're very much a work in progress document. I've been thinking about some of these things came to me very easily. Some of these things have taken more time to kind of percolate over months and years. Thinking about, well, maybe this, maybe that. When I thought about the Halfers, and it really took me a little while to be like, oh, well, they've got this bon vivant lifestyle that's bucolic, but also hedonistic. So there's this hospitality aspect, but there's also like this party hard kind of aspect to them, that range that they can kind of fall somewhere on. So it made sense that there's this thing where it's like, well, that's how they would spend their money, right? They want to live the good life, and so you have to spend money to live the good life. So that's how the benefit they get from leaning into their own trope of that ancestry. But it also comes with a pretty substantial cost. Can come with a very substantial cost. So as we can see, like with that, with the Halfers, like they'll be really popular in like very rural or lower class areas. Like they'll be incredibly popular because they don't have to spend a ton of money to be really popular there. But maybe not as popular in the higher realms because it's more expensive for them. Or there will just be fewer Halfers that are able to do this thing. Who are not naturally kind of charismatic people. And this is taking me a lot longer than I thought it was going to take me to get through this. Because we're sitting at, we're getting up there on time skips. That's fine. We'll make it through the next one, but we're for sure not going to make it through. I can't imagine that we will get to doing the hex mapping today. So if that's what you were waiting for, sorry, we're probably not going to get to that today. That's always been kind of a back burner for us. It's like, if we got time, we'll do it. To the point where I should probably just stop putting it in the descriptions. And just know that that's always going to be in our back pocket to work on. So let's go on to Giant Keen. So Furbolgs, Goliaths, Half Giants, etc. They all fall into this. Powerful builds, pastoral roots, they're protective, vigilant, natural travelers. In my world, these guys are called Windwalkers. Windwalkers are just people who live a nomadic or semi-nomadic kind of lifestyle, where they move a lot. So if they follow, they have herds that they either have domesticated or herds that they follow of wild animals, then they're generally referred to as a windwalker. They walk where the wind takes them, essentially. So yeah, all this stuff feels very, very clear. So their animal affinity are ruminants. That's basically, it's a very specific scientific term, but we'll break it down as basically like hoofed animals. So that's going to be most of your domesticated, like cattle. It'll be cattle. It'll be goats. It'll be sheep. This would also include horses, I believe. No, it doesn't include horses. Yeah, again, yeah, because they're more mountain folk, so I probably wouldn't include horses with them. But this also includes things like deer, elk, moose, reindeer, caribou, etc. Any sort of big megafauna like this would. I would also, even though they're technically not a ruminant, include things like mammoths. I would also throw those in there. That's sort of their animal affinity. And their material affinity is actually soil or sod. So dwarves have stone and rock, but the giant can actually have soil or sod, and that means that they make a lot of like earthworks. So they would make a lot of like, they would also, like, between them and the half-elves, they would make a lot of these kind of buildings. A lot of these are made out of basically like rammed earth, in addition to waste recycled materials. So together, if you saw these ancestries in an area where they were living together in a more sort of permanent area, they would build stuff like this. They would probably have less glass in it though. No. I guess I would say that soil. Yeah, I think I'd say that. Sorry. I would say that soil side. I'd go ahead and throw sand in there. So yeah, I would say that they make glass too. Why not? We're well known for glass blowing. So now we get the full Earth ship when you have those two together, for the most part. You're going to have a lot of glass, which is really good in the mountains, lets in a lot of light, helps to keep that solar radiation, which means that they make a lot of things like hot houses, greenhouses, things like that. I think, because I don't think I put anybody else in there. No, I don't think so. Yeah, I think we're good there. So yeah, so they're big herders. They also make a lot of sod houses. So I'm thinking like, because they make a lot of houses, or homes, buildings that kind of look like this. As well as we could also say, so in a lot of ways they do make those traditional, almost like hobbit hole kind of houses. I like that one. That one looks very pretty. Nice too. So where you have like living earth on top of them, living soil on top of them. There's like a longhouse, house kind of looking thing. We have these cuts of turf that are like layered upon each other. So very, very warm, very good with like wintry, cold conditions, which makes sense for them living in mountainous kind of areas. This might be the sort of things that they do for like storehouses and things like that if they are fully nomadic. But remember that they are pastoral, so they're more likely to be semi-nomadic. So they probably have a place where they primarily stay in the summer, spring to summer, and then in fall and winter they have a different area that they generally live in. There's a more specific name for that, but I'm just going to use semi-nomadic, even though there is a very specific term, and I know this term and I can't think of what it is. So we'll just have to move on, unfortunately. So yeah, they build a lot of that. Then the sand will also give them the ability to get into things like glass. So if you need stained glass for your temple or cathedral or something like that, probably want to try to get your hand on a giant kin, glass, glacier, to make it for you. Their weapon affinity, clubs and maces, just kind of made sense. Very rudimentary, which kind of falls into kind of their feeling. Giants and clubs always make sense. Most D&D giants often wield things like maces or morning stars or stuff like that. They generally don't use swords, though there are some that use swords. But that's generally not the iconography we generally give them. And the relations are close to half-elves, as we talked about, and are halfers, but far from humans and dwarves. I'm wondering if anytime you get into people who are nomads or pastoral, there tends to be a lot of like cattle raiding. I'm thinking of like highlands, and basically anywhere within the British Isles. A very, very common thing, especially in like Iron Age era, with hill forts and things of those natures, where cattle thieving well up into what 18th and maybe even 19th century Scotland for sure, where you have a lot of people that live upon the heath, and they primarily do like the Highland cows, and stealing cattle is just a thing that people do. They steal it back and forth from each other. So I can see that as maybe being something, doing a lot of raids on things like human and dwarf civilizations. You have the humans potentially down in like the plains, and the dwarves maybe further up into the mountains. So depending on what time of year is where they are, whether they're in their highland pastures or in their lowland pastures. You're in your lowlands obviously in the winter, and you're in the highlands in the summer. Doing raids on these sedentary civilizations. So it kind of makes sense that maybe there's some long-term animosity between those ancestries. They don't get along as well as they might otherwise. There's a lot of long-time bad blood. And we have our Genasi. I need to change this audio. Pull back up into the same audio again. Not to put that thing in the... Get out of here. I don't need to hear you again. There we go. The Genasi. Their hallmarks are Chaos Touch. I talked a little bit that magic in this world, wild magic, is very radiation adjacent. So they are both touched by the chaos, but also more resistant than most other Ancestries. And that makes them highly distrusted. Their animal affinity are buggies, which means that they would be the ones who are good at making silk. I said that somebody else would be better at making silk than the Halfers. That would be the Genasi. The Genasi are would be generally regarded for their silk. And so, but that also means that the nice thing is that D&D has a lot of large bug-ish kind of creatures. Now there are true animal bugs, like you have fire beetles aren't one. What's a big bug? Yeah, why am I trying to guess? We can literally look. Give me a filter. Let's go creature tech. Let's go to a beast. We'll go with low CR first. Crabs, frogs. Oh no, they're on here. I was gonna say giant fire beetle. I thought they were under monstrosity, but nope, technically under beast. So likely to have things like that. That means that probably other stuff's on here too, right? What am I missing? Scorpions, spiders, things that are creepy and crawly that most people don't like. A lot of people don't like, so it makes sense that it goes with the ancestry that a lot of people don't like. We should have some other stuff up here. Sturges. The Sturges pet would be awful. I wouldn't trust that thing for a second. Man, I thought the giant centipedes up there, yeah. So those sorts of things would be the thing. Giant wolf spider. Ooh. There's also things like, I would also include things like, because I think Steeder is technically not an animal, right? Steeders are monstrosities. I would also include things that are monstrosities, which are essentially just big bugs. Big magic bugs. Steeders are one of them. If you are arachnophobic in any way, you should probably turn away because I'm about to pull up images of Steeders real quick. I'll tell you when I turn it off. So yeah, these guys, I would definitely put those under them as well because I mean, that's just a big spider, man. There's nothing really monstrous about it other than it's big, and since we already have beasts that we consider to be giant, I didn't really get why these needed to be a monstrosity. But yeah, okay, spider gun. Yeah, those sorts of things. The creepies and the crawlies of the Genasi. Their material affinity, magic, specifically the elements. So that's why I was a little confused as to why I put transmutation up on humans, and I was like, I'm not sure what exactly I meant by that. Unless I might have literally been thinking. I'm sure this probably has. I was trying to tie in some thematic thing to metals, where we make like alloys and stuff like that, or turning things from one thing into another. But that is just kind of what all the material affinities are. So I don't know exactly what I meant by that. So their animal affinity is bugs. Their material affinities, magic, and the elements. That means they're good at things like dowsing. They make charcoal. They're good at... Charcoal is literally just burning wood to be better at burning. They're great at things like sailing, which is, harnessing the elements in that sort of way. And things that we would approximate as avatar bending. That sort of stuff. They're very good at that stuff. In their weapon affinity, I decided to give them martial arts and the associated martial arts weapons. Martial arts in the sort of like Kung Fu, Wuxia kind of style. So they'll have all sorts of... I was about to say weird. I mean, let's be honest. Some of the, especially if we're throwing Musha in there, some of those things are like the chi powered weapons are very weird. Like the ones that kind of look like little back scratcher things, and but big fans. The ring swords stuff, range. I don't want to. I want to say strange. I want to say strange for what we think of as a traditional D&D setting as weird, or strange what we might think as sometimes practical weaponry. Interesting. So having stuff like that, and you'll notice I haven't put relations down here because I couldn't remember where they were on the relationships wheel. And like I said, I need to look it up. Actually, I may need to just update it. Maybe that's why I didn't do it. I was probably looking at it. I was like, something. I want to change something about it. Once I got down there, and so I didn't do it. But yeah, primarily, right, if you're looking for a good magic person, more likely than not, you want to look for somebody who's a Genasi. They're tapped in, they're touched by the chaos, they are tapped into the weave of magic. They're just naturally kind of better at it. These are things that when we think about, we talk about like in D&D sorcerers being just inherently touched by magic. Genasi are essentially like the hedge wizard version of a sorcerer. They're already just immediately more tied into the elements. They can access it better than most people can, just fundamentally, just intuitively. Not good as potentially a sorcerer, though. If you were trying to find yourself a Genasi sorcerer, they would probably be pretty powerful, especially as an elementalist. Then we'll move on to tieflings. We'll close it out. The last two, again, I haven't worked a ton on. Because these people are in very specific areas of the world that I haven't really delved into a ton yet. And also, especially with the Genasi, they have such large consequences in the world that unless somebody's really, a campaign they really want to dive into that, I haven't expanded a lot of that through play. And that's kind of the thing as I'm doing this world building. Like I said, this is a huge world building project that I do. It's a huge world. It's like Earth size. It's very big. And so I don't need to come up with everything from the very beginning. It's like I have some ideas about stuff. I have some very bare bones stuff kind of filled out about the world, and then through play and as I need to build that stuff or specific areas of the world as I'm running campaigns, I fill out that portion that informs the larger world building. So that way I can still be surprised by the world building and it still kind of happens in a very organic fashion. So it's at the same way, it's top-down, but also bottom-up world building at the same time. Like, I know the general world, where they are, and sort of the major nations of the world. I don't know a ton about the major nations of the world. I know the most about the one we're playing in currently, which is still not a ton, just because they're not of a level... They're functionally not even on the mainland, so... They're not on the mainland of the nation that they are even in. The Caliphate. We'll finish out with tieflings real quick, and then we'll jump over. And I'm going to take a quick break after that, and then we'll jump over and do our Appendix N. There we go. Lost it for a moment. So, what are their hallmarks? So this is one that we do have people who are in there, and I've given them 2 mechanical ones thus far. They have independent reflection, and I let them choose because the thing that's different about tieflings is tieflings are very wildly different, kind of depending on the D&D tiefling you get. If you go like infernal or chthonic, they have very different feels to them. So they have independent reflection, which is basically like a Peter Pan's shadow. And other reflective surfaces. So this is a very funky one. Nobody has chosen this one yet, but it is the idea is like, oh, you could, if you were in a room, let's say, how do I want to? let's say that you were gambling in a tavern. And there is a mirror in a position that would allow well, it's very weird because I haven't had to really iron it out in play yet. The idea is that you can sit still while your reflection does other things, kind of unnoticed, essentially, by doing things in the mirror world. In the same way that D&D has the things where you can get trapped in mirrors, that those mirror worlds exist. And so your shadow or your reflection lives in those. And so you can do things like have them go places and do things and look at things without necessarily endangering you. Now, they have some pretty limited stuff. They can't really like physically move objects or stuff, but they can perceive things. They can take a look at things. They can look at things, and because your mirror is a reflection of you, in that it matches you, where your right hand is its left hand kind of situation, is that it can do interesting things. The thing I was going to be is like you could use the reflection to look behind a table or something like that. I'm trying to think of it. I was going to use the situation. I was going to use cheating at card game situation. I was like, if the mirror is behind the person you're trying to cheat off of, you would be able to see their cards generally anyways. But maybe not necessarily. Maybe they're just hiding their cards really well. But if there was a mirror in the room, you could let your mirror self might be able to look through the mirror at the cards. And this might be the sort of situation where I let them also cast spells from it, like you can do with like a familiar too. They could do things like that. But they have very limited interaction in our world. They can do stuff in the mirror world, but they can't necessarily do things in our world. So it's a very weird one. I just haven't had to iron it out and play yet. But I like the idea of it being like, oh, it's this sort of like Bloody Mary thing or whatever. It's like the mirror is tied to, demons and fiends and all that kind of stuff. So doing that stuff. So the fact that it is independent. And then the other one is a prehensile title. And this essentially just, it works as mage hand. But, attached to your body. Now, the only thing that's bad about these is that I don't technically have a downside for them. They're good mechanical ones. But I haven't come up with good downsides for it yet. So I need to think up some ones. The tail one is pretty... I think there's... Because I was going to be like, well, you can be... grabbed or something like that. The prehensile tail is really cool because it gives you the classic, like, oh, I'll pickpocket this guy using my tail while I'm talking to him kind of thing. That's a very clear, straightforward one. But the hallmark, the independent reflection one, I would probably just make it that you have disadvantage on trapped things, and then the thing is that it's not useful in a lot of situations if there's not reflections around. Now, if you're a character who realizes you have that, and then you carry a mirror with you, you have a lot more versatility with that. Whereas a prehensile tail can be used in all places at all times. So I have to come to the downside to it. I was thinking something like balance-oriented, because that's generally the problem with losing a tail for most creatures, is that their balance sucks. That's what they're useful for. But that's a very permanent thing to, because I don't want to be just like you have disadvantage on dexterity checks and saves forever because you lost your tail, and the only way that happens is by cutting off your tail. Very permanent thing that happens. But I'd have to come up with something else. I might lean in and do something like a dog tail kind of thing. A dog or cat tail, or most animal tails. Not most, some animal tails. Definitely dogs and cats, where it's just like they give you away as far as your emotional state. That they are telltale, so maybe it makes it harder for them to lie. But then it becomes really hard to do something like, oh, and be a bard or a rogue or somebody who's really good at telling lies. And it's like, but you have a tale that, I mean, if you were going to play that character, you just wouldn't take the prehensile tale. You would just take the independent reflection one. It's kind of I guess the tale idea is that it does have a mind of its own. That's kind of the thing that we're going with. And so then if you wanted to play the but as a rogue, you'd also want the prehensile tale to be able to do silly things like lockpick, even though you technically need 2 hands to do lockpicking. But then you would just not make a charisma-based rogue. I don't know. Again, I have to mull on this more, but that might be a good one. It's good enough that I'm going to write it down. I like it enough that I'm going to write it down. No, excuse me. I'm gonna say like a dog's tail. Or cat tail. Making it difficult to deceive, or another way to sort of hide emotions. The independent reflection, pure pinch. And I'll go ahead and put this in here. I'll just say more susceptible to not my tutu, to the mirror realm, or to mirror realm effects. The idea is like mirror traps and stuff like mirror creatures often can't interact with you in the real world unless you do very specific things. But if you are a tiefling with an independent reflection, they might be able just to attack your actual mirror self. Or we could go full Peter Pan and just be like, sometimes you might lose it. And then I'll put a question mark at that. Anything that I'm not sure about, I always put like a question mark at the end. I like the prehensile tail one. That'll probably work pretty well. I like that. I don't think that most people... It is the most basic useful one. I think that independent reflection is technically, I would find that to potentially be more useful in a very like clever kind of way. But baseline prehensile tail would be more useful. But being more susceptible to the mirror realm effects, or losing control of losing control. We'll say not control. Let's say command. I was gonna say shadow again. Reflection. If we lean into the Peter Pan shadow thing where they have to like sew it back to him, the idea where he truly like loses it and he has to go get it, and be like, you can actually just lose command of your reflection. Now, I kind of like this last one because there are creatures who don't have reflections. Those things being things like illusions, but also most notably things like vampires. So if you see a person who doesn't have a reflection, you go, ooh. And I don't know how well known it would be that a tiefling can lose their reflection. So that could be a fun one to be like, you just lost your reflection. And your reflection can do, man, who knows, all sorts of weird stuff. Because they have an entire mirror realm they can get to. And then it's like, can they get out of the mirror realm into the real realm? And then there's like a second of you running around doing stuff. Who's not you. Ooh, I like that. That's a huge problem, by the way. That's a huge That's a huge, messy roleplay side quest problem. Be like, hey, there's just like another guy who's you, looks exactly like you, talks exactly like you, is you, doing who knows what somewhere else. And you have to track him down and try to shove him back into a mirror. That's dope. I really like that, actually. Yeah, forget everything I said about this susceptible to mirror effects. Well, yeah, you're just going to lose. But you can lose command of your reflection. And it can potentially enter real world. Because maybe the thing that's keeping it in the mirror is that you have command over it. So if you lose command of it, there's a chance it can get into the real world. And then you have to consider if there's a mirror realm, truly like there is a reflection of the room you're in that room, does the mirror room exist beyond that room, beyond what we can see through the mirror? My thoughts are yes, in a very like back rooms kind of way, like a very liminal space kind of way, in a way that it's a mirror network almost, like all mirrors are in some ways attached to all other mirrors. So all the mirror realm is itself, but it's not like a one-to-one recreation of our world. So being like, even if I lost control of the mirror, I lost control of my reflection, and I smashed this mirror so it couldn't get out, would it not then run somewhere else and come out of a different mirror and still be a problem? I don't know. I'd have to think about that. And then what do you do if it gets split up? If you break the mirror and it's broken up into, now there's a bunch of reflections of you, and all of those reflections get out? Oh my god, that'd be... I get into weird wobbly magic stuff. So we're gonna keep it there. We're gonna stop there before I run fully down that rabbit trail trying to figure that out. So that's it. Hopefully you enjoyed this sort of homebrew worlds, ancestries, and races. You saw things I had made. You saw me write the stuff for something new, and then you watched me just off the top of my dome kind of come up with something that for the independent reflection, in addition to the prehensile tale that we had. So we're gonna jump in. We're gonna do Appendix N stuff, but I have to do a quick bio break, and I need a refill on coffee anyways. So we're gonna do that. So you guys sit tight. I'll be back in just a little bit. All right? Hang on. Okay, I'm back. Did it all. Yeah. One of those things where you take a drink and it kind of goes down the wrong pipe. Apologies if I do some coughing. Promise I'm not dying. Well, at least no more than usual. Alright, so we finished up our Ancestries. Talking about that. I'm really jazzed. I'm really pumped up about the mirror tiefling thing. I think that'll be really cool. And how you can use kind of this idea. Now, obviously, you run your world however you want, so it's perfectly fine as a dungeon master or game master to be like, hey, we are only kind of focusing in on these specific ancestries for this game, and I don't want to use some of these others because they don't make sense for the world or whatever. You can always have that conversation with your player if they want to play something that's outside of those guidelines. You're like, okay, do you want to... Is there something specific about the ancestry that you want to play, or is there just some mechanical thing about it? There's just a mechanical thing about it. You can just reskin that character. Like if somebody wants to play... I was going to say an elf, but an elf would be hard. Maybe they want the elf because they want specifically, I don't know, the magic cantrip or something that they get. Be like, all right, well, then we'll just be like, you're just a human, but we'll just swap out that stuff. But obviously, you're not going to have the 4-hour rest thing. You can have that conversation with them. There's often a lot of ways that you can be like, oh, sometimes people just want to play a character for a very specific mechanical benefit. If they're like, no, I really want to play an elf, and be like, okay, I hear what you're saying, but maybe not this game. Maybe a different game later on. Or you're going to play an elf, but you're going to be like the only elf in the world, or some other aspect of that. But the one of the ways that I like to do it is that as we saw, I have this very specific, small, short list of ancestries in my world. We've got humans, dwarves, elves, saurids, which are dragonborn and others, halfers, which are halflings, gnomes, and others, half-elves, giantkin, which are furbolgs, goliaths, half-giants, etc., genasi, and tieflings, and those are the primary ones. So the idea is, instead of doing the stick and being like, don't play other ancestries, instead of trying to offer the carrot and be like, if you play one of these core ones, you get some extra stuff. You get some extra potentially mechanical stuff, plus you're just more ingratiated into the world itself. That you will feel like you're more a part of the world if you play one of these ancestries that I already have woven into the fabric of what the setting is. So, it's nice. I mean, there's lots of cool stuff. I like the elf in stuff. I like the unique mark thing. So if you want to play an elf if you decide that you want to play a character who's like a spy master or master of disguises or something like that, like an elf's really good for that because they're exceptionally good at doing that with their face blindness aspect kind of thing, or it makes them very, very easy to do, and they can pretend to be other races or other ancestries, that kind of thing. But now we're going to talk a little bit about Appendix N. And that's probably where it's going to end today after we do our Appendix N. We are not going to get to the hex map stocking today, because we are already at, we are approaching, we're getting close to 2.5 hours. Not quite there, but we're getting close to that. And probably not going to, my voice probably won't hold out for much longer than that. I might come back later. If you're just tuning in now, I was going to stream yesterday and do some video game stuff over on Twitch, but my internet crapped out on me, so I wasn't able to do that. Like, literally had everything set up, ready to go, and then the signal went out. I didn't come back on for many hours, but that was fun. Made for a very quiet Halloween Eve, or at least if you're watching this live, it was Halloween. So we're going to talk about the Appendix N, but I might do more, all that to say, I might do some more, try to do the stream that I was going to do yesterday, maybe later today, maybe tomorrow. We'll have to see kind of how my voice feels and kind of how my days go. But if you're interested in that, that's twitch.tv/Red Ragged Fiend, same name over there as well. You go check that out and follow me over there and get the notification when I'm going to go live. whether that's today or tomorrow, or maybe not. Who knows? I haven't been really good with that. And in fact, I haven't streamed on there in a while. But I figured, throw in and do something a little bit different. It's not always just this stodgy D&D stuff. We'll do some other stuff too. But speaking of stodgy D&D stuff, Appendix N, let's talk about. So the Appendix N is, the background of it is the nth appendix in the original 1979 Dungeon Master's Guide by Gary Gygax. So there's our stodgy. That's our segue. Got it. Get it. It lists D&D's inspiration sources for the game's kind of themes and settings and gameplay. This was really specifically helpful in the 70s because D&D is a new type of game for the most part, and nobody really knew how to play it. And it is arguable that picking up and reading the booklets, and at this point the books, that you would also know how to play it, that you could figure out how to play it. This is kind of a newfangled game. And it's also like this, Appendix N is this cornerstone of early D&D history that gets referenced a lot, especially when you look at the game that it was compared to the game that D&D is now. It's very kind of different. So basically what it does is it has a lot of inspiration sources. Most of these, actually I think all of them may be books. I'm not sure if there are any movies on there. I think they may all be books. Books and or authors / stories. Because a lot of these kind of came out as serials, so they were released in magazines in small chunks rather than, and then later sometimes compiled into books or anthologies. Now, of course, it does include Tolkien's in there. Obviously, we know that halflings were originally named hobbits, but until they got, cease and desist from the Tolkien estate, and they were like, well, you gotta change that name because you don't own the rights to that. But it does have Tolkien's influence, but I think if you look at a lot of early D&D, it doesn't feel very Tolkien-like. And early D&D primarily focuses around sort of mid-20th century sword and sorcery fantasy. If you're not familiar with the sword and sorcery fantasy, I would refer to that as things like Conan the Barbarian by Robert E. Howard, those kind of stories. Fritz Lieber's Fafhrd and the Grey Mouser series, and the eponymous Jack Vance from the Dying Earth series, which is where we get the term vancing casting from. So all that magic stuff, the idea that you cast a spell and then lose how to remember how to cast it, that you have to memorize individual spells to your spell slots, which has changed in D&D over its tenure, over the 50 years now that the game's been around. But in the beginning, it was like, for every spell slot, you had to assign a spell to that you remembered. And that was the Dying Earth thing in Jack Vance, and that's how it worked in those novels, is that once you cast the spell, like, it's removed from your memory. That's why you have to memorize spells again each morning, and that aspect still has stayed in D&D. You still need to prepare as a wizard and a druid and cleric. Is like, no matter how many hundreds, if not thousands of times, if not more than that you have cast these spells, you still have to memorize them every morning, essentially. So it very much kind of comes from that aspect. And the sword and sorcery genre has really close ties to adventure stories. That can be serials like the Doc Savage, which I'm sure not a ton of people, if you are certainly younger than me, then know who Doc Savage is. I don't think anybody I know probably knows very much about Doc Savage. But it also adventures stories. Doc Savage, to talk very quickly, Doc Savage is kind of like the model for what we might call like neo-adventure, things that kind of came out, things like Indiana Jones, The Mummy, those sort of like adventure revivals are all very, very firmly based in stories of characters like Doc Savage. There's like gentleman, adventurer, smart guy, but also tough guy kind of archetype. And then there are also classic adventurer stories like Rudyard Kipling, where you're looking at things like The Jungle Book and Kim, and talking about, far, in that case, India areas. and also the stories of things like Robert Louis Stevenson, so stuff like Treasure Island, very classic adventure stories. There's not like magic in it, but it's also not very close to real life either. Though I guess in Rudyard Kipling's area, there is Rikki Tikki Tavi, which is about a mongoose, so that is pretty fantastical, I guess, in its own right. So, yeah, I mean, those are kind of the basic stuff, and those are all things that I grew up with the Robert Louis Stevenson stuff and Rudyard Kipling stuff as a kid. Those were sort of, especially as a small child, those were sort of like my bedtime story kind of things, and then kind of moved on, obviously, into Indiana Jones and stuff like that, and really kind of went straight into Tolkien. Kind of missed the Conan, Robert E. Howard stuff. That came to sort of later in life. And came back to it, though I was very familiar with Robert E. Howard and had spent quite a fair amount of time around the area in which he lived. Basically the area of the world that Hyboria is based on, or what he was looking at when he looked out his window when he was writing those stories. So I have some weirdly close ties to it, even though I'm not the hugest fan. Technically, I like his Solomon Kane stories a lot better than the Conan stories. Or, what's the other one? Cole the Conqueror, right? Who I find also very close. Too close to Conan to be that much different. So that kind of gives you an idea of what's in the official 1979 Dungeon Master's Guide Appendix N. But I do think that there is a merit in basically creating your own Appendix N, and that's one of the things we're going to kind of show off, or I'll show off. I'll pull this up here in a minute and show you, because I have some different categories, and I'm going to slide in some things. We'll talk about them very briefly, and why it might be useful to make this for yourself. So, why would you create your own sort of like Appendix N? Why am I creating my own as a Dungeon Master? It kind of serves, at least for me, as a North Star, to make sessions, adventures, and campaigns kind of feel cohesive, like everything's kind of like within the same genre or kind of theme, has the same feeling to it. It's great for helping you world build, for ideation and thinking about stuff, finding sources for that great inspiration. When you're like, I need some inspiration, or we all have that as a Dungeon Master, Game Master. Maybe you're starting to feel a little burned out, or you're feeling like you're scraping the bottom of the barrel for some ideas. You go back to some of these things that are in your inspiration list and pull out a book or sit down and watch a movie, something like that, and help let that kind of restock your creative juices, get you thinking about things and how you can apply stuff that the media you consume, how can you take it and warp it and change it and turn it into the media, I guess not media in this case, into the game, kind of game information you produce as a Dungeon Master or Game Master. So I think it's really good for that sort of stuff. It helps set the mood and player expectations for your intended style. This is something that you can share with them, when you can share those inspiration sources. Be like, oh, well, I'm really interested in running a dark fantasy campaign. So here's a couple of different things that I'm going to sort of draw from, or kind of my inspiration for this. So if you want to be familiar as to like what that's going to feel like, here's some stuff you can check out. You can read about it or watch it, or, who knows, this day and age, somebody's probably just watching a video essay about it rather than watching the actual TV show or whatever it is. And whether that you want to do, you want to do dark fantasy or high adventure or cosmic horror or anything in between. So the players can kind of check out those sources to better understand your vision, and they can kind of match that energy and tone and think about the kind of character they want to create and play in a setting or world that's like that, in a campaign that's going to be, or game that's going to be like that. And at least for me, the cool thing is like I get to share some fun stuff that I enjoy with some of my friends, and they can take a look at it, and I get to share, and maybe they'll like it too. Hopefully they'll get to learn, find their next new great love, and if you're playing in a game and somebody shares it with you, maybe you'll find your next best your next favorite book or movie or whatever it is that you never knew about. Whether that's a writer, like an author, or maybe a new artist that you like, a new music you like, or director, movie, etc. All right, so let's talk a little bit about my personal. We'll see what kind of goes into mine, and this is kind of an overall. So obviously, like if I was gonna, like I said, gonna pick something and be like, hey, I want to run a dark fantasy things, I would cherry pick sort of like the dark fantasy elements out of the things that I had in my Appendix N and be like, shoot them off to my potential players and be like, here's a short list of like 5 different things of different types of media that I'm kind of drawn on when I'm thinking about this. It kind of informs my ideas about what dark fantasy is. But I'll go ahead and share this. We had all this stuff at the top where I was talking about it. So, at least for this time, I decided to go ahead and create one for each category that I'll share. We'll talk about them a little bit. What do you guys think? Do you think should we share them, all of them first, and then go through them, or should we go by them? How about this? Let's write them all out first, and then I'll go back and talk about each one. I like that better. It helps if I turn my keyboard on. There we go. So for art or artists, I put down. June Suimi. June Suimi. And we'll look at. I'll bring up some images and show you guys later. Books or comics or stories. For this one, I put down my Vampire Hunter D novels. Movies or TV, I put Flesh and Blood. Then we'll talk about. Under. What did I put under music? Oh, I technically have 2 under here. That's fine. We can put both of them in there. That's alright. Now, that's obviously not something I can probably show you without getting copyright something. I mean, I might be able to with these guys, but... And I put 2 under video. Well, technically, we'll put them as 1 entry. Add a little plus here. Alright. So we'll, no particular order, we just kind of went alphabetically. So, June Suimi. So, June is a really great artist. He's probably best known for maybe his Wizardry covers. The old Wizardry video game. Old. They're still making Wizardry. I don't know why I said old. They're still extremely popular. Well, they're extremely popular in Japan. Wizardry is an interesting story. If you've never seen it, there's a YouTube channel called Basement Brothers that I think probably does the best look at it that I've ever seen in my limited scope. So Wizardry is a Western dungeon crawler. It came out in the 80s and was picked up and became really popular in Japan, and then continued to be popular in Japan and has not remained popular in the West. So if you talk to people who play TTRPG stuff or things like that, or you talk to people who know stuff about like anime and stuff, people from the West will assume that, oh, well, they got those influences from D&D. And it's like, no, they actually got the influences from Wizardry, and Wizardry originally got it from D&D, but there is a level of separation that makes that's one of the things why fantasy stuff is a little bit different in Japan than maybe what we would think of too as like traditional D&D type fantasy. My favorite one about that is like Delicious in Dungeon. So Rui, the author of Delicious in Dungeon, the mangaka, she has never played D&D. You would not know it by reading and or watching Delicious in Dungeon because it feels like it, but she's played a whole bunch of Wizardry. So there's that. So let's look at some of his art real quick. There we go. So it's very, very like classic that 80s very classic style fantasy art. So you can already see here a little bit differently. You see, so doing the cover for Wizardry. See the long ears. Now you're starting to see it. So you're looking at one of the people who was like very instrumental in developing kind of that style. So it has this cool mixture of both Western, almost romantic, I guess is how I would describe it, kind of art style. But also is done by somebody who's outside the context of that art style. So it has a slightly different feel to it. As you can see, you're right there, very classic D&D adventure-y kind of stuff. So similar, but not the same. Classic horned helmets and everything. That saber. But yeah, like lots of cool stuff. So if I need things to kind of percolate my brain about when I'm thinking about like fantasy, and I want to think about what I think fantasy looks like art-wise, one of the people I go to. Also, one of the did art for Gwyn Saga. Actually, we'll see a couple of different things that he's got art of that are very classic things. Go, boom. Gwyn Saga being one of them. If you watched the channel before, I've talked about Gwyn Saga. But Gwyn Saga is something that I think he's done potentially book covers for? Can't remember. Yeah, there's another Gwyn Saga. Interesting story. Long running series of books. Very, very much in that Vampire Hunter D. I just haven't read them, unlike I've read some of the Vampire Hunter D novels. Yeah, this very almost like a dreamlike aspect to them that I really enjoy too. And there's Parn and Deedlit, his version of Parn and Deedlit from Record of Lodoss War, which Japanese media actually based off of Dungeons and Dragons. An actual play of their campaign that they played in Dungeons and Dragons. And this is like, and what? It's in the 80s, so might be first or second edition of D&D they're playing. It kind of comes up with the story of Record of Lodoss War. One of those two. But yeah. Again, you see the elf, very long ears. And Deedlit would become, like, this is, FYI, like, this girl right here. This elf Deedlit. That is the template for how elves are portrayed in, basically forever in Japanese media. It's like, that is the progenitor of it is Deedlit. So, long ears. Willowy, green, blonde, all that stuff. Is there anything else we need to kind of look at here? Wizardry cover, very cool. Got like some mysticism revivalist kind of stuff kind of going on here. That's sort of like late 19th century kind of thing into early 20th century. You can kind of see it almost like an Art Nouveau kind of vibe to it. Also did this cover of Bilam Balam. Very weird game. Very weird. You could definitely tell it was not made by an American, even though it's set in the American West. But very, very fun. It's got the like a Weird West kind of thing. It's got interesting stuff kind of going on. But yeah. So yeah, the great source for me for art. So if I want somebody to talk about like how I think fantasy kind of looks, at least in my mindscape, this would be sometimes the kind of stuff that I would bring to them. Like, oh well, check out this guy. Check out some artwork by this guy. Especially stuff when I'm looking at stuff like this, like the Gwyn Saga. The Gwyn there. Anybody else? There's another wizardry thing. More Gwyn. But yeah, That's shooting something at me. Oh, this one's cool. Cool. All right, so yes, we can leave that. So just with me. So art and artists, look at that. That's the sort of stuff that kind of informs my thought. The Vampire Hunter D novels. Ugh, how do we even explain the Vampire Hunter D novels? For those who are unfamiliar with it, you probably can't see. No, you definitely can't see it in this range. I do have some Vampire Hunter D artwork that's on my walls. Iconically, the art for that is a lot of the art is done by the Final Fantasy guy, whose name I'm blanking on. What's it? It's that, right? No, that's the composer. God, what's the guy who does the art? Or did the art? Anyways, the same guy who did the classic sort of like watercolor art for Final Fantasy. The concept art. You can see him in this shirt too. Yuki Kikuchi there. I know that's the author. Man. Anyways, did a bunch of arts, and so I have this one. They're coming out in omnibus form, which is really nice because there's a whole bunch of these novels, by the way. I think there's like 20-something novels. Anyways, they're putting them out in like three book omnibuses, 3 novel omnibuses, which has been my preferred way to read them. And it's also one of the few ways to get them. And they're new, so they're coming out slowly with new translations in English. But the art in them's really pretty. But how to explain... there's also anime, so if you want to watch the anime... Yoshitaka. Oh no, that's who I'm thinking of. That's the artist guy. But if you want to watch the anime, I highly recommend Vampire Hunter D Bloodlust. It's the newer movie. There's 2 movies. This is the newer one. Newer. Still kind of old at this point. It is very good. It's an adaptation of one of the novels that I've read. I think I prefer the adaptation to it. Just because it kind of gives the bad guy a little bit more characterization. I think it's helpful. And bad guy. I link it a little bit more. And plus it adds like all the Carmilla stuff, which is definitely not in the original book. Adding all that stuff, which is really, really cool. What's the best way to kind of explain Hunter D? So Vampire Hunter D starts coming out in the late 70s, early 80s, I believe. And it very much follows that tradition of sword and sorcery stuff that was popular during that time period. The stuff that's not Tolkien, stuff that's like Michael Moorcock, the sort of weirder side of fantasy novels that were coming out at the time, where stuff's a little bit stranger. The stuff that's like a little bit more in the vein of what D&D was made considering, like the weirder aspects of it, was very much informed by that kind of media, as is this book. The only difference about this book is that, of the series, is that Vampire Hunter D, despite kind of what it looks like, going around, riding on horses, using swords, stuff like that, is, well, I guess it's set very far in the future. It's like in the century, like, it's like 12,000 AD. So it's like way far in the future. Like, it's way out there. The Earth is post-apocalyptic. There is a rise of vampires that happens, and they take over the world. And almost eradicate humanity. They get pretty close to it. Then there's a war with aliens. There's an alien invasion, and the vampires win the war with the aliens against the alien invasion, but are utterly decimated to the point where humanity is able to sort of start to recapture the world. And so that is the setting for Vampire Hunter D. But it's so far in the future, and there's all these remnants of like incredibly powerful vampires that live in this sort of techno-feudalistic society. So there's like castles with automated lasers and all sorts of crazy things. Like maybe this is not a great picture of it. Yeah, like this is a cyborg horse. Like that kind of stuff. Like things are insane in the future. Yeah, this is a better version. There's cyborg horses and stuff, and there are guns too. Like there's a bunch of guns. Like there are both like ballistic weapons as well as energy weapons, and all sorts of weird stuff that kind of happens in these books. But the books are just very weird, and that's why I like them. They're way out there. There's a story that takes place with a flying city, like a flying ship city, that's just kind of been abandoned, that's just kind of floating through the air that they discover and deal with. There's one that deals with like a dream realm, and one that's like this pocket dimension. There's vampires in it, as well as all sorts of. So one of the things that they kind of set up with the world is that when the vampires take over, they basically they bioengineer all the creatures that humans were scared of from folklore, and as well as all kinds of new awful things, and kind of birth them into reality. So there's all sorts of strange creatures like I'm trying to think of some stuff, because some of the stuff's just really off the wall. Even vampire, the titular D, this guy, who is a Dampier, and half human, half vampire. He's a daywalker. Even he has a symbiote. He has a creature that lives within him in his left hand. Has a face in his palm and everything, and has all sorts of weird powers, and suck up magic and do all sorts of weird stuff. So what I like about the books like Vampire Hunter D and stuff like that, it's just how gonzo they are sometimes. So far beyond what we consider maybe within the realm of like standard kind of tropish fantasy kind of stuff. And it's just like, nah, you know what? It can just kind of be whatever. And it can just be wildly insane. And the thing about these little novels is that they don't really ground any of it. They're just like, oh yeah, vampires made weird stuff when they were in charge. And that stuff's just still around. And there's just monsters everywhere. But there's also like normal stuff, like it's normal humans just trying to like live their life, and then there's this weird, almost like socialist communist kind of capital city that's like the end all be all of human civilization, even though none of the stories, as far as I know, take place in the capital. The capital's like a big like Tokyo like mega city that kind of runs all of human civilization, as far as we know, I think, in the books at this point. And so, but everything else is just like small frontier towns outside of that, and everything kind of feeds into the capital. So at the same time, it's this weird sort of talk about the bureaucracy and the powers of that, and centralized power, and all sorts of weird stuff. The books have very interesting themes in them and through lines throughout them, and what it means to live on the frontier. And there's a character who gets the opportunity, comes out and gets tested by somebody from like an examiner from the capital to determine whether they can basically go to school in the capital to become, I can't remember, they're going to become, it's something silly, not silly, like I think it's like an accountant or something like that. I think they're just really good at math, so that like somebody comes out and has a degree, and everybody's like incredibly happy because they're like, oh, you get to go live in the capital, and that's like a much better life than trying to be a dirt farmer out here on the frontier just surrounded by monsters. You won't have to deal with any of that. And then there's just kind of this underlying unspokenness in the novels that like, oh, there's clearly things are probably way worse than most people think it is in the capital. Like the capital is probably actually not a great place to live. But that's very much kind of done in like more like pregnant pauses kind of things, where things are just not alluded to. Nobody really ever talks about what's happening in the capital at all. So yeah, I threw that in there. For movies, we did Flesh and Blood. So since we're already on the sort of anime, and this one's a little anime heavy, I guess. I didn't really intend it to be that way, but most of this is kind of anime manga heavy. For this first one. So, Flesh and Blood, if you guys are probably familiar, since we're already talking about it, you guys are probably familiar with the old Berserk, right? And probably, if you're familiar with manga and anime, you've probably at least heard of this series. If you haven't, I'd say that dark fantasy, with an emphasis on the dark, would be how we would describe it. It's a no-good world where really bad things happen to bad people and good people. There aren't a ton of good people. There's mostly bad people, but there are a few good people. But, you know, bad stuff just kind of happens to people in this. It's really sad. It's not a fun watch. It's enjoyable, but it's not happy. Let's put it that way. But what a lot of people don't know is that one of the primary sources of inspiration for Berserk is actually Flesh and Blood. Which, if you've watched Blade Runner, you'll be familiar with Rutger Hauer, who plays, I guess you would call the primary antagonist in Blade Runner. Is the synthetic. Anyways, Flesh and Blood is this very medieval-esque story. It's about Rutger Hauer is one of the main characters. He plays a mercenary. They get paid by a noble to take a castle. He and his band of mercenaries. They take the castle, and then the Lord's like, yeah, I'm not going to pay you, and you guys can get out. So they kind of swear revenge against them. They attack the people who are coming to them on the road. They find out they're connected. They retake the castle. Like Berserk, it's a movie where there aren't a lot of good people in the movie. There's primarily just bad people, and good people often die pretty quickly. And bad people do bad things to each other, in very bad ways. Yeah, there's really no good guys in this movie, so it's kind of there's not really anybody to root for in it. But it is a very cool movie. What I like about it is it very much enforces the idea that maybe good, or who the protagonist is kind of a matter of perspective in a Rashomon kind of way. It's all about perspective. So for each of these characters, we have the three characters, kind of what we would consider probably the three primary characters of the film on here. In each of their sort of own way, they kind of all see themselves as the main protagonists of the movie. Who are often in opposition to each other, or two of them are in opposition to one of the others. And they kind of switch teams throughout the movie. It's interesting. There's a cool thing if you want to know a little bit more about the mercenaries. This is also what I would say is a very high source of inspiration for something like Broncolonium, which is spaghetti fantasy is how they call it. So the fantasy equivalent of a spaghetti western, which is a cool source book for 5e that you can play. Which, yeah, I mean, it kind of focuses on it's fantasy Italy, and it's a lot of mercenaries, a lot of like scumbags, bandits kind of stuff. And I like that kind of stuff. And Flesh and Blood is definitely that kind of stuff where there's not a lot of like, oh, well, it's mighty kings going to war against each other. It's like, no, these are like the squabbles of like minor nobles and people like welching on agreements and people just in the muck trying to grind it out and pull themselves to the top of the pile over everybody else's kind of bodies. Get there. Over massive writhing bodies to get there. So it's a down in the mud kind of movie. Here's the thing is that you can't really, I would be hard pressed to recommend the movie to anybody is the thing, because it is graphic in very specific ways. I would say if you're interested in that, I don't know. I'll put it this way: there are at least one scene of capital R in it, so you have to determine whether you're going to be okay with that on screen or not, and how they deal with it during and after that, because that's not the end of the movie. That's pretty early on in the movie, actually, and includes, you know, multiple main characters in it. So it kind of depends on how you feel about that and depictions of that, whether you're going to be okay watching this movie or not. And again, it's not like this is a great soaring epic or anything like that. It's not even what you would consider like a grand movie. Like it's a okay movie. It's a low budget medieval-esque kind of thing, but I think it's really interesting. I really like the mercenary angles of it. I think that's what I draw on most from it. It's kind of this idea that, like, oh, you pay these people to do the job, and then you watch on the bet, and then, well, you took a bunch of people who were like hardened war fighters, and then you're like, I'm not going to pay you for fighting my war. I can't believe you turned around and tried to do war on me. So yeah, that's why I like it. It's interesting. I've watched it a couple of times. I'll probably watch it more. But it is a movie that, at least for me, stuck with me, that I thought was really cool. Now, let's move on to, let's talk a little bit about music. The music, I just put 2 different dungeon synth artists under here. We'll go ahead. Feels under the oak. I don't necessarily want to play the music or anything, just for the copyright aspect of it. But I'd say go check it out if you don't really know anything about dungeon synth. It's that's music made with synths. But a lot of dungeon synth is really like droning and, well, honestly, a little bit like the background music we have right now. Can be kind of droning, kind of monotonous in the background. But there are artists within it that are doing other different stuff. Tales Under the Oak is one of those that I really enjoy. And they do their own little world building thing. The Toad Folk 2 just came out, maybe a month ago? If even that, actually. I don't even know when Toad Folk. Anyways, their new album just came out. Check it out. It's fun. In addition to the sort of dungeon synth music, which is a little bit more lively, has a little bit more going on with it, they do intersperse like stories. There is like world building about the toads and the frogs in the world, and about their world and how they live in it and what's going on with it and all that fun stuff. And you get lots of little cool art that kind of goes with it. Funny. So I'd say that this a little bit more cozy is how we talk about most of this. Is very much like a Mr. Toad kind of aspect of fantasy. Yeah, it's hard to describe the music without playing the music. But yeah, I mean, it's fun. There's jaunty stuff in it. There's less jaunty stuff in it. But, you know, you can find it on YouTube or Bandcamp or Spotify or wherever you listen to music. You can find it, give it a listen, see if it's something you're into, and go on from there. And in that same vein, I just had another one. I don't want to. So Umbria is a place, so I have to make sure that they're bringing up the right thing. Yeah. So Umbria is another artist. This album is the one that really kind of got me into them, which is the Entombed Wizard. And they've had other stuff that's come out after that I listened to. But yeah, it's I'd say very playful. It's got a lot of stuff that's going on. It feels like it's got a little bit more classical inspiration to it. Often has a lot of like counter melody and things like that, which is one of the things that kind of draws me to this music over the normal like kind of droning dungeon synth. So it kind of depends on what you're looking for. But this is often kind of things that help me when I'm doing prep, kind of informs me, as well as I just like the art. I think the art's cool. This artwork's probably my favorite, the Entombed Wizard. But the other covers are pretty good. Homecomer's pretty cool. Bar Walker. And the Rhyme Pathways. I think they're self-titled, right? Or no, the sleeping wizard. But yeah, it's hard to explain. I would say try out this one first because that's the one I like. Here's the thing: is that if you jump in here and try it out, you're gonna know very quickly whether this is for you or not. I'll put it that way. You'll probably know in the first few minutes whether that's gonna be something you're interested in or not. And if you're not, then I wouldn't say hang around waiting for something to change. I feel like a lot of their music's kind of like that. So yeah, I'd say give it a check out. Again, this is sort of the stuff that I might listen to when I'm doing things like prepping for games and stuff like that. The kind of music that I might listen to. It kind of puts me in the mood. It's not necessarily something that I would listen to as a background for when we were playing the game, because I think the music's a little too involved for that. It is sort of music that you kind of want to listen to, and it's not necessarily just straight up background music. So not great for playing in session, but is stuff useful for me when I'm thinking about prepping for a session and maybe the sort of feels that I want to go with, what I want it to feel like. And then we'll hop on and do video games. So if you are not, let's do Unicorn Chronicles first. And it's bringing up weird. Oh, sorry, not Unicorn. Unicorn Overlord. I don't know why I wrote that down wrong. Unicorn Overlord. If you're not familiar with Unicorn Overlord, it is a Vanillaware game. Those people who made Dragon's Crown and a number of other games. They're best known for their very hand-drawn pixel art. I'm trying to see. Ooh, a good one. Really want just the image. There you go. So it kind of gives you an idea of what the style kind of looks like. So it's often like really overwrought. It's very got like these grotesque body proportions, where this one's not as bad as Dragon's Crown. Like Dragon's Crown's got really bad like grotesque body proportions, which some people were really upset about. I struggle with the Dragon's Crown thing. Is that there was a bit of a hubbub about it. And they're like, oh, well, you mean all the females are hypersexualized. It's like, yeah, but the males are also like weirdly macho. It's like they're meant to be like these kind of grotesque forms. They're not really supposed to be representing real people and reality in really any sort of way. But so this one's toned down a little bit in the Unicorn Overlord. A little bit. I mean, there's still a lot of it, but it's toned down significantly from maybe what we're looking at for things like the Sorcerer Dragon's Crown, who has got huge tracts of land. We'll put it that way. So they definitely toned it down a little bit, but I do like it. And when I first saw this game, I was like, oh well, I like their art. I like the idea that it's very overwrought. The design's very overwrought. Everything's very opulent in the games. In this very beautiful hand-drawn style. So I knew I already liked Vanillaware, who makes it. And they're basically like, oh, this is basically a continuation of the Ogre Battle series. And I'm like, oh, well, I love the Ogre Battle series, and it's one of those aspects where it's just kind of like the perfect juncture of two different things. And then the game it's just good, too. It's got a lot going on, and it is exactly what it's meant to be. It's really no more, no less. It pretty much hits everything it needs to hit, and yeah, like kind of, it's what I wanted. Let's put it that way. It's what I wanted. So here we can look a little bit more at the. You see, too big. They talk about like the grotesque sizes. Like, look how large this guy is, and how muscular and beefy he is, and he's got these little feetsies, where his hands are larger than his feet, kind of aspect to him, the Beast Man. But if you guys are familiar with the Ogre Battle series, then these little grids down here in the corner will make a lot of sense to you. If you're not, we're going to talk about that right now. So it's basically a spiritual successor for a game that last came out on the Nintendo 60. Well, I guess technically the Game Boy Advance is when the last one came out. But the last mainline game came out on the Nintendo 64. So if you're not familiar with Ogre Battle is a, I guess you call it a real-time strategy. Well, it's so weird because it's a real-time overworld. It's a management game, where it's like a war management game. So it's real-time overworld where you move your units on the battlefield in real time. And they're not going to show me any of the world, are they? Anything of the overworld? They sure aren't. So there's an overworld for each map you go into. There's all right, zoom all the way out. So time, well, it doesn't in Unicorn Overlord, but in Ogre Battle series, time takes place on the overworld map, and that is turn-based. So as you move through the world, the calendar goes by. Once you get into an actual battle, a stage battle, it goes into real time as you move command units to move around the battlefield, sort of like top-down style, in an almost like, yeah, I guess normal like RTS kind of game. But then once those units interact with enemy units, you go into a tactical turn-based, almost like D&D style fight, which looks like, we get a big image of it. Yeah, that's them talking on the world map. Well, there's the world map. That's from the Super Nintendo one. That's the very first game. So it's got this different mesh of gameplay. But then once you get down there, it's like this turn-based one. Don't look at this stuff. This is from the Tactics game. That's the one that came out on GBA. It's very much like Final Fantasy Tactics. Not the same kind of game. There's an overland. So this would be like the stage where you're doing the real-time move, and you can see that this is a clock that's in the counting down, like an hourglass in the corner. And then you go into this, which is like the turn-based, our side goes, then your side goes, then our side goes, then your side goes, kind of, because every character's initiative is done independently. But also, once you get to this level, you're actually not in control. So you're not in control of the tactical fight, and you basically deal with everything up until the fight starts, until the actual engagement of units starts. And then once that starts, you don't really have any control. Facing, and in different games, facing plays an issue. Doesn't really, I don't think it plays in Unicorn Overlord. I don't think your facing matters in Unicorn Overlord. But there are leaders in the units, and if you kill the leaders, then they lose morale, and they break, and they're routed, and there's stamina in the game, as well as hit points. That's the Tactics game again. That's the 64 one. Yeah, 24 years ago. That was from last year. So it's been a full 25 years now. That doesn't make me feel old. I definitely played it as a kid. But yeah, and then Unicorn Overlord is kind of the as it says, the vanillaware masterpiece is the Ogre Battle successor fans have wanted for decades, technically. Yeah, I mean, there's nothing. How to explain it? It's just really cool. I don't know how to explain. The fantasy of it's really cool. There's different routes and stuff. So the game is fun, but what is also nice is that it does have that Final Fantasy job system kind of aspect to it, where units upgrade and they get stronger. You can kill units in the game if they die. They might be permadead, but you can resurrect them by going to a witch, or you can let them become undead units. And so you can get skeletons and zombies and vampires and all sorts of weird stuff. You can recruit monsters and dragons, and it's just fun. And the story's pretty good. Story does have the sort of aspect of most like JRPG stories, where in the end you do kind of just kill God, and that is kind of always the story. So it does have a little bit of that. It's not quite the same, I wanted to see if there's an ogle before we have the map. Probably not. Anyways, that's what the overworld looks like, and what a stage looks like for one. There's the overworld. I was really looking for the. Maybe I should call it relationship map. Because there is a thing that you can pull up in the game, which kind of marks everybody's relationship to everybody else, because you have a whole bunch of different factions that are doing things in the game. So it's got a lot of kind of political intrigue kind of stuff going on. There's a big church thing that's going on. There's two nations that are fighting. One nation's going through a revolt or a civil war. There are some subdued nations that you try to liberate from the Empire, as well as freedom fighters that you meet from from the Empire. It's very interesting. You have like this tactics view in there where you talk with your master tactician Hugo, who kind of tells you about the stage that's coming up in the fight. There's abilities to like train your units and stuff. There's a lot of gear is a very important part of the game, about outfitting all your characters with the right gear and choosing having the right gear and choosing the right units to fight the right type of units, because they do that sort of Fire Emblem thing where some things are weak to other things and some things are strong to other things. So it really depends on what you fight in. Oh, this is Let's Play number 126. Oof, that's a long Let's Play. But it is kind of a longer game. I was hoping to get the... That's the character... And that's just the character map. So as you go through it, right, everybody starts off as a fighter, then you can go into all these different... You can spec into all these different classes. And it's in addition to both how your stats are, as well as sort of your alignment. So how chaotic or lawful your character is, which depends on whether when you take a town or a castle, whether you are technically liberating it or capturing it, depending on its morale, and that influences your character's chaos or law leaning. So obviously, if you liberate things, you're more lawful. If you capture things, you're more chaotic, which is how you spec into things like ninjas and berserkers and black knights and versus things like samurais and knights and paladins. You go all the way up here. They got a lich in here. And also, this is very gender-based, so female characters can only become some types of classes, and male characters can only become some types of classes. So depending on who you recruit and who you keep in your party, there's kind of the unit management screen. See that? And you can only have up to 5 units in your 3x3 block. But yeah, I mean, like that's what I like about it. It's like it's a very big. It's got a bunch of war stuff in it. It's got a bunch of. The story's pretty good. It's got a bunch of political intrigue stuff that's going on. Even the GBA game, if you just want to play a lighter game, it's just like in that Final Fantasy Tactics kind of milieu. You want to play that. That also has a pretty good story in it. If you want to play that, and it has plenty of the political intrigue in it as well. So if you're interested in that kind of stuff, there's an overworld map about how you move through there, and that changes what time it is during the year. Which there are things that are timed events through that, like characters that you only unlock in certain circumstances. So it's a game that if you really want to see everything, you have to do multiple playthroughs. I think the minimum you have to do to at least access all the characters at least once, I think is 3. And you really got to be focused on that to do that. But yeah, Unicorn Chronicles, or Unicorn Overlord, is literally just the sequel to that. So if you like all that stuff and you have, let's say, a Nintendo Switch, you can play this game. Yeah, good. Yeah, so you can kind of see it. So instead of doing that, so you see the little grid there, and now those start to make sense. And you can choose. This one's a little bit more tactical, so you can go in and give like each unit, each person within the overall unit, different commands about different types of abilities they can use for their different resources. So it's very granular. It's as deep as you want to get into it. You don't have to get all the way. You don't have to get all the way down to doing stuff like that really to beat the game. But if you really want to get mastery over the game, that's where you need to go. But yeah, I mean, like, that's what I like this one. You're prince of a lost kingdom that you're retaking. That's what Unicorn Overlord's about. So this is the main character. That's why I was pointing at him. That's your main character in there. And then you have lots of guys with you, and lots of classes do very specific things, which means they're really good at fighting other specific classes. Like this guy, it's kind of hard to see because he's got stuff over them, but you can see he's got a big hammer here. He's really great for taking down big guarded, like, guys that wear a bunch of armor and have big shields. He's really good at smashing through them with those big hammers. Those are the kind of characters. So you look at the enemy units, see what kind of units are in there, and that determines like how you want to put your units on the battlefield and move them around and do all that fun stuff. And each stage that you're playing in has a clock on it, so you're always under time pressure. Not usually a ton of time pressure, but some time pressure. And in addition to just like normal maps, there are like castle sieges and things like that that are a little bit more difficult, where there's not like places to rest and stuff and recoup in there. But yeah, very interesting game. So if you're interested in that very tactical resource management aspect, I'd say definitely give either one of these a try. I would say that Unicorn Overlord is obviously the most accessible right now, because there hasn't been a new Ogre battle in some years, since the Game Boy Advance was around, I guess. Then I'd say probably play the Game Boy Advance one. If you're looking for a physical thing, that's probably the easiest one to get your hands on, because it's kind of hard to... They were never super popular. They're kind of limited in the kinds of games they have, or the availability of the actual games. Otherwise, you might have to play the PC version, if you know what I mean. If that's the case, then I'd say go play like the 64 one. The 64 one's really good. The SNES one is good. All I was going to say about that is that it's not as pretty to look at, and it's a little bit more spreadsheets the game, because of the graphical limitations of it. It doesn't have quite as nice of graphical user interface as any of the other games. It's got the worst of them, and it's probably the ugliest to look at. But is interesting in its own way, and each game's a little bit different. They all do something different. So like the tarot does different stuff in different games, and there's no tarot deck, I think, in Unicorn Overlord that I know of. There's no tarot deck, so you don't have to worry about that. And tarot decks they give you bonuses to certain different things and battlefield conditions, and like I said, they're involved games. So if you're looking for a real meaty thing to chew on, I'd say go check out one of these games. Highly recommend. But it does, like, me as Dungeon Master, I send this to players and be like, look, these are the kind of games that I like. So be aware that, you know, I enjoy the resource management aspect of the game. So, and my players know that now, and I tried to inform them of that beforehand. Like, you guys should know that I enjoy this aspect of the game. So it's going to come up. But yeah, I think that's everything. Hopefully that was helpful for you guys to see, like in Appendix N, why you build it. I'm getting the idea. We're going to come back and I'll add more stuff to this later as I have stuff, and we'll drop in on this on different streams and check it out, and I'll add to this over time, because obviously there's a lot more than these that I have ready and really loaded in the barrel, in the chamber, ready to give to you guys. But I don't want to overload you, and we're already approaching 3.5 hours on the stream. And my voice is pretty much shot at this point. So I think we're going to have to call it for today. Might be on stream later. We'll see how this does. If so, we're going to jump over probably on Twitch, play game. Maybe, if not today, probably tomorrow. Because like I said, I'm a little light on the D&D recently. So I figure I might as well do a little bit more streaming while we're doing that. Maybe jump in and do something not D&D related. Well, tangentially related, I guess, because of Viva Dirt League. That's it. Hopefully you enjoy this. This was useful for you. If so, if you liked it, give it the like. If you want to see more of this and you want to be notified when I'm going live in the future, subscribe here, or jump over to Twitch and follow me there if you're maybe not as big on the D&D stuff, but you just like my vibe. You can go jump over there and give me a follow there, and I think I'm going to keep anything that's not kind of D&D related maybe over there. Like I said, I might do a video game stream either today or tomorrow, very reggae themed. Over there, there's blogs. I've got stuff that you can get from DriveThruRPG that's pay what you want. So if you want to check out some stuff that I've actually made for D&D, you can pick that up for free if you want to, or throw me a bone or two. Whatever your feelings are, whatever your abilities are, pecuniarily. That's probably not a word. Whatever your pecuniary means are. There we go. I think that's about it, though. Enjoyed it. Always fun to talk about this stuff. And, get into the weeds on my own world building and talk about mirror tieflings running amok in the real world. But that's it for me. Enjoy the rest of your weekends or whenever you're watching this, and I'll see you guys later. All right? Bye.